If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Have you ever encountered something creepy, spooky, or paranormal that you still can't explain to this day?
Back in the early 2000s, I was deer hunting on state-owned lands. At dark, as I was walking the trail back to my truck, I noticed small yellow lights in the woods along the trail. Almost like fireflies, but a bit bigger and not flashing on and off like fireflies do. The lights quickly scattered when I approached, yet they continued to follow me. I could never get a really good look at them because when I would turn to face them, they would quickly move to my periphery. When I would sense them getting close, I would spin to face them, but they would scatter about and just sit until I started moving again. It scared me because at times, I could feel them coming in behind me, and I was afraid they would touch me and possibly hurt me. I ended up making a full run toward the parking area. The whole time, the lights kept pace behind me and to the sides of me, just out of full sight but close. At times, they were merely inches away from me. When I made it back to my truck, I just threw my gear into the bed and got the hell out of there. As I was pulling out, I turned to look into the woods. In the tree line were thousands of small yellow lights, just hovering. Like they were watching me leave but wouldn't or couldn't leave the woods. The house I grew up in had a few weird things happen in it. Things would move or go missing and turn up in the spot they were last seen a few days later. We used to joke that Granny Kavanaugh, an elderly woman who had passed away in the house years prior to my parents' purchase, was still manipulating things. The cats and dogs would react to things that weren't there and would stare at the corners of rooms. My uncle moved in with us for a year when he first moved over here from England. We set up a room for him in the garage. He tells this story better than I do, but one night he was fast asleep and felt someone sit on the bottom of his bed, felt the corner go down, and felt his legs shift from the weight. He sat bolt upright and turned the light on, and no one was there. I used to have a surround sound system for my PC set up in my room. My PC was off, but the system was on. I was sitting on my bed drawing, and I heard a woman's voice coming from the speakers. Another time I had a used mobile in a drawer that hadn't been used in months and had no SIM card. One evening I was again sitting on my bed drawing, and the phone started ringing. As you do, I answered, but all I could hear was crackling, so I quickly hung up. I took the battery out after that, but a few weeks later it rang again. This time I did not answer. I destroyed the phone soon after. I was 13, camping with my family on the border of Alaska and Canada. I think it was June, just about dusk, and if you know anything about Alaska, you'll know that was quite late. We'd been listening to what sounded like bear noises, moans, grunts, and caterwauls like you'd hear from baby bears, coming from the woods all evening. Although this isn't an unusual occurrence in Alaska, it still sent a shiver down our backs. While my younger sisters, my mother, and I were setting up the tent, a sudden commotion caused a flock of birds to panic and fly out of the forest about 150 yards away. We all turned to look in the direction of the sound, and just as we did, something crossed a clearing where the birds had flown. In the clearing there stood one tree with branches starting higher up, and as the thing, we thought it was a human, it walked upright on two legs, arms swinging, etc., crossed, its head just came up to the lowest branch. We automatically assumed it was my 6'2" brother going into the woods to pee. It was one of those moments you see in a movie, I said, that must be Blake, and not 2 seconds later, our brother shows up behind us, asking why we look so startled. So then we rationalized it by saying it must have been someone else going into the woods. My brother went over to the clearing to check it out, and as we stood and watched, we realized how huge the thing was. Blake was about half its bulk and came about 2 feet short of the lowest branch that the thing's head brushed. He came back shaky and clearly startled. My brother the skeptic said he heard something very heavy running very fast through the woods. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but this was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and I still can't explain it. In summary, I, along with several friends, celebrated my 21st birthday in Tipperary a few years ago. We were all broke, so we opted for a hostel, which was literally in the middle of nowhere. We had to trek through an actual forest to arrive to this place, which looked to be easily 500 years old. The building was huge and pretty much crumbling down, but it was grand. The owner gave us a quick tour, and we all silently agreed that the place was creepy but suitable for the night. Anyway, we all sat around in the sitting room just having a few cans, talking shit, and deciding on our plans for the next day when some bloke came in, gave us a nod, and sat over the far side with a book and a bottle of something. I found it a little weird, but I'd never been to a hostel before, and I'd heard that people tend to just chill with other random guests, so I didn't think much of it. Anyway, fast forward a few hours and he finally gets up. At this point we're all fairly well on, so one of the lads tries to make conversation, and the guy had the weirdest expression on his face. He completely ignored what my mate had said and simply replied, "Bad night out there, I'll chop some wood," before walking out. Once he leaves, we all agree that he's a bit feckin' creepy, but we think nothing more of it until I wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of an axe chopping wood outside. I'm not joking when I say that I nearly shit myself, and the sound continued until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, none of us are looking too fresh, but nobody is saying a word about anything. There's no sign of your man, and there was only one large bedroom in the place, so there was no way that we missed him. We pack up our stuff, and as we're leaving, we bump into the owner outside. "Who was your man chopping with last night?" One of the lads asks a question, and the owner looks at us as if we have 10 heads. "You young men were the only ones present last night," he states, "and I have never witnessed a group of individuals appear so frightened in my entire life." While I was in high school, my friends and I decided to explore a small patch of woods located behind a trailer park. It was in the dead of night. There were 6 of us. We were walking down the trail laughing and joking. Our friend, Billy, disappeared at some point and scared us by jumping out of some bushes. We were all laughing and walking when we suddenly saw this white/blue glowing ball of light. It was floating between some trees. We all became quiet and tried to determine what the glowing ball was. Then we quickly realized that everyone in our group was present and accounted for. The ball of white-blue light began to glow more intensely, as if it were getting larger or moving closer to us. We all freaked out and ran as fast as we could to the parking lot. To this day we don't know what it was. Clinton Road, New Jersey, is home to some strange history, grim myths, and straight-up ghost stories, which makes it an ideal destination for bored teens who just got their licenses. One night shortly after my friend passed his driving test, he picked me up in his dad's car, which had those obnoxious blue headlights that blinded me as he pulled up my driveway. We pick up some more people, drive around aimlessly, and decide to go to Clinton Road and throw a coin over the bridge to see if the ghost kid throws it back, one of the many legends associated with the place. As we're driving along the road towards the bridge, a car with its left headlight out passes us coming the other way, and one of the girls shouts "Padiddle," which made everyone laugh because most people stop saying this around age 9. A few minutes later another car with its left headlight out passes, and my friend the driver screams "Padiddle," kind of mocking the girl. 3 more cars without a left light pass us, which we're on alert for now so we could each be the first to say "Padiddle." By the last one, which was a cop, we were all screaming "Padiddle" at the top of our lungs, not really noticing how odd it was that 5 of the 8 or so cars that passed us had a light out. We pull over at the bridge, do the coin thing, nothing happens, and we get ready to go back. Frustrated that I had never been remotely scared or excited, it was probably my 3rd or 4th time there, while the people I was with always were, I decided to really try to scare myself. So I told my friend to leave me there and drive down the road until I couldn't see his headlights and then turn around and come back just so I could be alone in complete darkness in the middle of the woods and let my imagination run wild with the stories of ghost Corvettes, KKK meetings, Wiccans, mafia graveyards, ghost forest rangers, and all the other stories I'd heard. After finally convincing everyone to go through with it, they get in the car and turn it on. I run straight to the door and start pounding on it for them to let me in. Confused about how rapidly I'd changed my mind after arguing with them for so long, they asked why I was suddenly so scared. "Because I know for a fact you had 2 working headlights when we got here," I said, "and now the left one is out." Mission accomplished, I guess. I was hiking around a local lake last year. Now, this particular lake is known for its coyote population, and it is 100% legal to hunt them on public land. I had taken my rifle out to do some hunting but decided to give it up after an hour and just take some nature-type photos. I took my rifle back to the car and ventured out with just my camera and my marine surplus K-bar strapped to my belt. I had just taken some sweet pics of a red-tailed hawk when I began to hear the bushes rustling. I turned around to watch a couple of mangy coyotes hop out of the bushes. I, being a quick thinker, snapped a couple pics of the coyote, then dropped my camera. I held eye contact with them as I drew my cobber in a defensive backhand grip. I knew I was probably going to die, but I wanted to show defiance in the face of death. I started whispering something about taking them with me when a rock came flying out of the stream behind me and caught one coyote right on the nose. I didn't turn around until they bolted, but I definitely heard no sounds of retreating from behind me. When the coyotes had gone, I turned around. The water was being displaced in a perfect circle in the middle of the stream. I could feel a slight charge in the air. I felt that I needed to say something, so I simply stated, "Well played, thanks," accompanied by a nod. I sensed some new feeling in the air and felt that the being was nodding. Suddenly I was coming to on my back next to my car after dark. I checked my camera, which was lying next to me, and there were no pictures on it at all from that afternoon. Not unexplainable or paranormal, but creepy nonetheless. One of my earliest memories. I always believed it was the memory of a nightmare or something until I told my parents about it a few years ago. I was maybe 5 or 6. I remember waking up suddenly in the middle of the night because something was in my room. I opened my eyes, and the room was very dark, with just a little light from a pole outside across the street. But in the corner, by my closet, was a crouched black shadow. At first, I believed I'd seen a chair piled with clothes or something, but my parents denied that there was a chair in my room back then. Anyways, I could feel it looking at me, watching me. Then the shadow smiled, and I saw a mouth full of long yellow teeth and then shining eyes in the dark. I just watched in stunned horror. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, it began to become clearer. It was about the size of a medium-sized dog, but it wasn't a dog. It had long arms and fingers and no neck, just a head on shoulders, or like someone hunched over. I was so scared, I remember crawling out of my bed and creeping to the door, back to the wall, watching me the entire time, but it didn't move. It just watched me leave and turned its head to follow me as I did. I closed the door and went to the living room, where the TV was still on, and I lay down on the floor in the light and slept there until the morning. Years later, I'm talking to my parents about random things, and I mention this. As I said earlier, I always thought it was just the memory of a nightmare I'd had as a child. But my mom looked at me a little funny and said, "Oh wow, I can't believe you remember that." I said, "Wait, what? That actually happened?" Of course I was freaked out. Then my mom says, "Yeah, that was your great-grandmother's orangutan. She'd been fostering her, and at some point in the night, she got out and went to your room. She loved you so much. She was probably checking on you, and you locked her in." Imagine, all those years I'd believed it was everything from a nightmare to an actual demon trying to steal my soul, but the whole time it was just the juvenile orangutan my great-grand fostered for a few months when I was 5 sneaking into my room in the night. When I moved in with my now ex-girlfriend, she told me she would frequently jolt awake and see a shadowy figure standing in her room or at the foot of her bed or even sitting on the bed. She said that no matter where she was living, she had seen it. I never thought much of it. I told her about sleep paralysis and told her about some things to ease it. One night, around 3 a.m., I get shaken awake by a hysterical girlfriend just screaming, and I can't understand her. I glance over her shoulder and spot a tall, shadowy figure. I asked who it was. I tried to sound tough, but I'm pretty sure my voice faltered. I didn't wait for it to answer. I lunged at this thing, and my girlfriend started screaming. I saw this shadowy thing on the floor and just started stomping the hell out of it while also screaming and finally told her to turn on the lights. The thing I was stomping was my blanket. She was screaming at first because she said she woke up with a shadowy figure standing over me and, in her words, messing with me. After I tried tackling it, she was screaming because I was yelling. I told her to sit on the bed and looked around the apartment. Didn't find anything. Freaked me the hell out. Cops appeared at our door 10 minutes later to make sure things were okay. Probably freaked a neighbor out. After that, whenever I was at my apartment, I would feel like something was watching me. After I and the GF broke up and I moved out, I never felt like that again. I'm just happy that when faced with a flight or fight moment, I decided to tackle that thing. Whatever it was. Which was probably nothing. When I was a child, I suffered severely from asthma. I mean, almost died several terrible times. I was forced to visit the hospital nearly every week due to my severe asthma symptoms. It was on one such fateful night that I saw something. I have never claimed it to be 100% true, as I was still lightheaded from the asthma attack earlier. But I know it wasn't a dream. I remember it vividly because my father, who was present despite my parents' divorce and animosity towards each other, drove us home. I looked out of the driver's side rear seat and down. There I saw a dog/human thing. It was the size of an average coyote, with hind legs like one, but its front legs were those of a human with animal paws. It was covered in silverish gray hair, and its skin was very dark and rough-looking. As I sat up more to get a better look, it turned to look at me. Its eyes were pale white and empty-looking. This thing was fast. It was keeping up with the car, after all. As we continued down the road, I never felt scared or anything. Just at peace. Like it wasn't going to hurt me, just protect me. Anyway, we turned onto our road, and it stopped. I looked out the back windshield, and it just sat there. And disappeared. From that day on, my asthma got less and less severe. I asked my father, who is half Native American, and he told me it might have been a spirit that was watching out for me. I'm not religious anymore, but but I'll be damned if I don't have a healthy level of respect for Native American customs/spirits nowadays. Not sure if that was what you were asking, but hopefully you enjoyed my encounter. I'm going to sound either crazy, or y'all aren't going to believe me, but when I was 15, I was super into going to abandoned buildings. I still am to this day. So one day after school I met up with some friends, 2 girls, including me, and 4 boys, and we walked to this abandoned building with 3 floors and tons of windows, which were knocked out. We hopped the wall and squeezed through the fence to get to it. I and one friend had an odd feeling about the place but decided to continue in anyway. We explored for a little bit and began to walk up to the 2nd floor. The step I stood on broke, and my leg dropped, though I asked my mate, let's call him Connor, to help me up, and he did. We explored the 2nd floor, then the 3rd, before heading back down to the ground floor. Earlier over near the back we had spotted some stairs leading down to a basement and thought it would be fun to explore there. I and the other girl, let's call her Lucy, started heading down first but abruptly stopped when we realized it was flooded with water and pitch black. Lucy asked Connor for a torch, and I asked another lad for his, and we shined them into the basement. Standing in the basement was a tall figure, and we froze. It was just standing there facing away from us, not moving. We laughed, thinking, oh wow, cool, creepy. Someone left a big Halloween decoration in here, probably to scare explorers, but despite thinking that, we all still got an eerie feeling, but none of us wanted to freak the others out. We were about to turn around to leave since we obviously couldn't go down there because of the water when the figure twitched. I again assumed it was a Halloween figure that was probably short-circuiting because of the water or something. Deep down I probably knew it was something else. Then it started to whine? I don't know why I stood there, but I did. I tried to move forward despite the water. Lucy ran with some friends. It was so odd and distorted, but when it started moving, we knew to run. Connor and another mate grabbed me and pulled me up the stairs to run, and we began to run to catch up to the others. Everyone was freaking out when we got outside and trying to come up with a reasonable explanation as to what it was. We went to school the next day, and none of us looked like we had slept all night. Definitely spooky, but surely there's an explanation behind it. I always try to convince myself that this was just my imagination going wild in a time of crisis. When my nephew was about 4 years old, we were at a picnic for a family reunion type thing at my uncle's house. In their backyard, there was an impressive treehouse with a slide that extended over a small creek. The treehouse stood about 30 feet above the ground. It was the middle of summer, and the water had dried up in the creek, leaving only exposed rocks, I guess more like small boulders. They were about 3 feet in diameter and pretty solid. My nephew and the other kids were playing in the treehouse, all taking turns going down the slide, and no one was really paying attention. How it happened is still not truly known, but we do know that somehow my nephew fell off the slide at its highest point and fell headfirst into the dried up creek bed. The sound was the first thing everyone noticed. It sounded like a gunshot, this extremely loud cracking. The picnic was silent at this point. I vividly remember running over to the creek to see what happened, and every time I think about this day, I get the same image in my head. I remember seeing him, lying on the flat rock, blood everywhere, and he's not moving. It's a really graphic image I get. Basically, his head is caved in. This thought is always followed by something I can only describe as static, if that makes sense. I don't remember what really happened, but my next memory is of my nephew lying on a bench, no blood, completely awake but crying really loudly. An ambulance came and took him to the hospital, and he only ended up with a concussion and some scratches and bruises. It still sticks with me though. I know what I saw, and I can't explain why I saw it. It feels like a memory, but it's not. Although I have never been a religious person and still do not engage with organized religion, I stopped identifying as an atheist after that day. During my junior year in high school, I did a semester away program where I lived on a farm in rural VT. For our science class, we each had to pick a random spot somewhere on the school's 150-acre campus and visit it periodically over the course of the 4 months to research soil types, tree growth, etc. It was basically on us to go out to our sites whenever we had time. The 150 acres contain approximately 80 to 100 different logging trails, which provide access throughout the forest. The day runs in a weird way where it's possible for your schedule to give you a few hours free at a time. In any case, a close friend, whom we shall refer to as Tim, had borrowed a bicycle from another friend to visit his work site, which is located quite deep within the forest. He left about an hour before lunch, and no one would have noticed he was missing for a few hours had he not come back. During lunch, I was sitting at a table with one of my teachers, who, about halfway through lunch, abruptly stood up. We ate family style, so this was weird, and told us he was going for a drive. When we asked him why, He seemed kind of agitated and told us that he just felt like he needed to get out for a bit. He hopped in his pickup truck and left down a random logging road. He found Tim in a ditch, 2 miles into the forest on that one same logging trail. He'd been going fast down a hill, and the brakes had shot out, propelling him into a tree. He'd broken his spine and couldn't move. He was medevaced to Dartmouth for emergency surgery and ended up paralyzed from the waist down. He probably would have been alright, but he tried to drag himself out of the woods and into a more visible position, badly damaging his spinal cord. He said that he was going to keep trying to drag himself towards the school. If our teacher hadn't had a ducking bizarre impulse to drive slowly down one in a giant network of logging trails in backwoods Vermont in the middle of the day, he most likely would have quickly at least become paralyzed from the neck down. The fact that he had such a terrible feeling and made such a seemingly arbitrary decision has always just struck me as inexplicable. When I was younger, my oldest sister and younger brother shared a room. This December night I remember very well because it was the night before St. Nicholas, and my sister and I talked about what we might get. So I woke up to a very loud noise in the kitchen, which was across from our bedroom. It sounded like someone was ripping out pans from the cabinet. At first I thought I was the only one awake, and this sound may have come from my parents doing something in the kitchen. I believe my sister also thought I was still asleep because I suddenly saw her walking to our bedroom door. That was really brave of her. First, she looked through the keyhole. To get a better look, she opened the door a crack, gasped in shock, and closed it again, but a little too loudly. She quickly crawled into bed with me and held me tightly, which was quite unusual since we didn't like each other at all. Then the door opened. I didn't see anything because I squinted. But I heard something snort loudly and make its way up to my bunk bed. This thing was right next to me and my sister. It paused briefly while my sister and I held our breath, and my sister squeezed my hand tightly. This thing slowly disappeared from the room, and I never saw anything like it again. When I asked her what she saw, my sister said it was small, green, and monstrous. It was one of, if not the, first times I was home alone overnight. At that time, I was between 13 and 15 years old, which meant I wasn't too young, but I was still essentially a kid. I was sleeping in my parents' bedroom. They had the comfy bed and a TV in their room, on the first floor of our house. We lived in a rural area, cornfields behind us, an elderly neighbor on either side, and the main road in front. Across the street was a very small church, less than 30 members in their congregation. Our lawns were fairly large, around an acre, with the neighbors 50 to 100 feet away to the sides. We shared a driveway with our right side neighbors, and my parents left cars in the driveway, so it wasn't immediately obvious that my parents weren't home. It was very late. I can't remember if I was already awake or if the noise woke me, but I remember I was lying in bed, with all the lights off in the house. Their bed was positioned by a window, with bushes, shrubs, and ivy extending around the side of the house under it. As I lay in bed, I heard someone whistling right next to the window. As mentioned, we had a strip of greenery next to the window, not impenetrable by any means, but difficult to navigate, especially in the dark. And yet, I didn't hear any footsteps or crinkling leaves. Just the whistling. It wasn't a song, at least not one I recognized, but it also wasn't just a tuneless whistling, it was actually kind of lovely. It slowly moved back and forth next to the window for a few minutes. I could tell from the sound that they were walking around the house. The whistling eventually headed out towards the direction of the road. I ran to lock all the doors in the house, grabbed a kitchen knife, and hid under the covers. I think I eventually fell asleep, but if so, it wasn't until it finally started to become light out. This wasn't suburbia or even a real town. People walking through someone's yard at night were likely to end up with pellets in their ass, or worse. There were, maybe, 100 people in the town, just a short stretch of road with houses on either side. Behind my house, the direction the whistler came from, was a small patch of woods, with cornfields behind that stretched for miles and miles. We never even locked our doors. The only time I remember us ever locking them was for a week-long summer trip. It was just that sort of place. I went on to spend countless nights alone there and never experienced anything similar again. Other creepy occurrences for sure, but those were all from my earlier childhood, when everything was more, the right word, flexible? When reality and imagination weren't quite as distinct, so all of those others I can write off as an active imagination, but not this. Even as a kid I knew there's probably some totally rational explanation. I'm sure there's a rational explanation for an adult whistling a tune outside of a dark 100-year-old farmhouse at 2 a.m. There has to be, right? Right? Growing up, I would go camping with my grandparents all the time. Every summer. These memories are truly unforgettable. At that time, My grandfather had already suffered a hip fracture, which prevented him from continuing his backpacking adventures. He'd tell me campfire stories of his glory days hiking through Yosemite on the JMT or the Western Lake Country. One of his favorite stories to tell was about the time he, my mom, my grandmother, and their pet dog were hiking and stayed on the trail a bit too long. He would always tell it after my grandmother went to bed. It was dark, and they were hiking by flashlight. Ahead, he heard animal voices that sounded like language. Thinking it was just someone foreign, he called ahead, "We're over here." So he didn't, sneak up on their camp. The voices stopped and then became frantic. They got a bit farther away until they were just out of earshot. My grandpa always mentioned that their dog, usually incredibly yappy, was just lying on his belly with his hackles standing on end. That's when a UFO took off from behind the next ridge, the loudest sound he had ever heard, and sped away at an insane speed. He told me he didn't sleep that night, and he stayed up with his pocket knife in hand, cradling my mother and grandmother. He also told me that they never told anyone back home, because he didn't want anyone to think they were crazy. He was worried he'd get fired from his job. Or committed. It wasn't a fun story, just this happened in the family, and we kind of keep it quiet. I always thought it was a completely ridiculous story. It freaked me out, sure. Was an impressionable little kid and already a bit freaked out by the movie Fire in the Sky. As I got older, though, despite my mother's own version of the story and the oddities, like knowing my grandfather always brought a pistol on every camping trip after that, I just assumed it was a big prank they played on me. My grandpa has been dead for, holy shit, 15 years now. My grandmother is still around but has pretty severe Alzheimer's. She's non-speaking now, but for a while she was living with my mom and dad. In order to give her a bit of a break, my wife and I decided to take her to dinner and a movie one day. This was a few years back. She was at that point with Alzheimer's where they kind of comprehend what's going on but are a bit spacey. Where they'll think they're talking to their long-dead husband, or dog, or whatever. We were talking to her about my work. It's exciting. I work on a space mission, robotic, not manned, and how she wants me to bring her back pictures from my trip. She thinks I'm going. She then starts babbling about the little men that they saw one day while hiking in their super loud spaceship. And the dog not barking. It wasn't prompted. It was one of those flashes of memory that people with Alzheimer's get. My hair stood on end. I asked her if they actually saw the people, and she told me they did and that they had wished they had a gun. The conversation lasted for a couple of minutes and confirmed the story I had been told years ago. Pretty soon after, though, she slipped back into babbling. There has to be another explanation, but I can't talk about that story without getting the worst chills. I'll never know for sure what happened, and that freaks me out the most. I was 6 at the time and headed down the hallway to my room. The hallway has 2 doors on the left. The first one leads to the bathroom, and the second is the room my younger brother, 5 at the time, and I share. It is just the 2 of us in the house. As I am walking to my room, I decide that if I see my brother, I am going to tackle him and start horsing around. At that exact moment he walks out of his room. I start talking to him, and he says he really needs to poop. I figured it would be best not to tackle him when he is on the verge of taking a shit and walking into my room. He waves to me as he closes the bathroom door. I open up the bedroom door and find my brother sitting on the couch watching TV. I quickly run back to the bathroom and open the door to find it empty. I run over to him and ask him if he was just in the hallway talking to me. He shook his head, and to this day he still doesn't know what I am talking about if I ask him about it. There is no way that he could have gone back into our bedroom from the bathroom. If it was him trolling me, he would have told me by now. 14 years have passed. I know what I saw, and I just can't explain what it was, and it gives me the creeps to this day. This happened in 2003. I was sleeping on the couch in my living room. My family just moved, and I didn't have my bed set up yet. At around 4 in the morning, I heard panting. Like from a dog. I thought I was just dreaming the sound, because we didn't have a dog at the time. I tried to ignore the sound and go back to sleep, but it wouldn't stop. I heard a sound and tried to figure out if it was the heater, but then I heard it walk across the floor to behind the couch where I was sleeping. I distinctly heard the clicking of nails on the hardwood floor, and the panting grew louder. I lifted up my head, and the sound stopped. I have no idea what it was or what it could have been, but the story doesn't stop there. A couple days passed, and I was woken up by my mom in the middle of the night. She came down into the living room because she said that she heard what sounded like a dog get up and walk from beside her bed all the way out into the living room where I was sleeping. It still creeps me out when I think about it. I and 2 friends were driving out at around 3 a.m. on this mountain road with no guardrails, no places to pull off for over 25 miles, and no lights, right on the side of a mountain. We were driving out to catch the sunrise and take some photos at a remote location for an upcoming film shoot. The spot is in the Superstition Mountains in Oz outside of Apache Junction. So we hit the road leading out, and we were driving slow, and I had my brights on, and it was pitch black. We're all talking and having a good time, and I see a set of headlights approaching around a bend in the distance, so I dim my lights. And this road is windy. We go around a bend and back out, and then we hit the turn. We saw the car lights on, and we still haven't seen this car. And it was definitely there. We all kind of got quiet, but no one really said anything. I did get this really ducked up thought that maybe they went over the edge. But we keep going. Again we see a set of moving headlights up ahead, the same thing happens. This time, my friend exclaims, "Okay, what the hell is happening?" And I think we're all just relieved that we're seeing the same thing. We kind of start freaking out, we slow to almost a complete stop and look around. No lights, no car, literally nowhere to go except off a cliff. It kept happening, and in between we did actually pass a few real cars heading in the opposite direction as us. By now we're paying insane attention to everything, and I'm so freaked out my hands are shaking. We finally get to the location, which is right where this beautiful bridge is. It's one lane, and you essentially have to take turns crossing. We stop before the bridge because there's a pull-off finally to park that mainly fishers use as an access. It's still dark, so we're waiting for the sunrise to start and just sitting there, basically all repeating, "What the duck?" Then we see headlights approaching us from the same direction as the others, and we all get super quiet and all just sit and watch. They get closer, go around a bend, and reappear, get closer, and then they're just gone. I and my friend say duck this and get out of the car and walk down the side of the road. We walk past where we last saw them, we look everywhere. There's nothing anywhere. I've been freaked out before or gotten bad feelings or had some odd things happen, but this sticks with me so much because all of us saw it, and none of us could come up with any explanation at all that made sense. Except all of these cars just disappeared or drove off a cliff. But we looked down the cliff, so what the duck? There was nowhere for any of those cars to go. The shoot never happened, and I haven't been out there since. I hope I'm not too late, and I have to admit, I can explain it, but either way, this is the scariest thing that has happened to me by far. Was visiting my friend who lived in the States, English Dutch here, and went to a party one night in a place I can only describe as bumduck nowhere. I wasn't drinking for antibiotic purposes, so I was the designated driver for the night. No big deal, Americans drive automatics, it's not even driving, really. So as we're about to leave, some of the others at the party ask us which way we're going to be going home, and my friend says whichever way was the way we were going home. To which they all reply, "You should probably go the longer way," but we weren't having any of it. They then told us to at least not stop until civilization. Slightly curious as to what was going on, I turned to my buddy and asked what that was all about, to which he replied, "Don't worry." I didn't worry, but we left all the same. Driving along this winding road, trees on either side and no real lighting aside from what was coming from our car, the tarmased road was full of potholes and was wide enough for the one car. If and when another did pass, both cars would be off the road, if you catch my drift. So as we round this corner, we see this thing lying across the width of the road. I slow down to get a better look and can see that it's a person. Worried it might be dead or bleeding or something, I slow down next to it when my friend tells me, "Don't stop, drive around." The way he uttered those words sent chills down my spine. So without saying a word, I maneuvered the car off the road, through the ditch, and around the lifeless body. As we pull off and check in the rearview mirror, the body sits up and stares at the car as 4 or 5 other people come out of the bushes, staring at us as we drive off, stupidly fast for such a small road. Later learned they weren't spirits or ghosts or yetis, but modern-day highwaymen. Still scares the shit out of me. About 9 years ago my family and another family we are friends with were at our cabin in Wisconsin for New Year's weekend. It was 9 p.m., and I, 9 years old, my sister, 6 years old, my family friend's daughter, and her friend, both in high school, were all down at the lake edge sitting in the snow relaxing after all the sledding we did while the parents were up in the cabin talking and drinking. We were all in a clearing, but to the left and right of us there were woods. My sister was looking up at the stars while I was sitting near her looking into the woods, and the family friend's daughter and her friend were sitting away from us talking about something. It was then that I noticed a snowball coming out of the woods toward me and my sister. I had never been more scared in my life. After all, who is in the woods at night throwing a snowball at some kids? However, after 2 seconds I realize it's not a snowball, it's a softly glowing sphere, and it's not falling to the ground, It just keeps floating through the air directly over me and my sister and then back into the woods on the opposite side of the clearing we were in. I was completely speechless and said nothing, but then my sister exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, I just saw a shooting star." Since she was looking up at the sky and the orb flew over her, she thought it was a shooting star. She was too little to realize that the orb was far too big to be a shooting star, but she now knows it wasn't a shooting star. The family friend turned and said something like, "Oh man, you're so lucky." I haven't ever seen one before, completely oblivious to what just happened. I was still in shock about everything, so I just sat there quietly, not saying a word. I later told my parents, who didn't believe me until a few years later because they thought I was just being imaginative, which I would have probably thought too had my sister not also seen it. That was my one experience with the paranormal. This is my first memory. I was a toddler, and my dad and I drove into town. First, this was amazing because I come from a large family, and my dad worked 6 days a week. None of us ever got alone time with dad. So right off, this was a special, happy occasion for me. I remember sliding across the seat a bit when we went around curves. This was in the days long before mandatory car seats or even seat belts. So we get to the store, and dad sets me down on the floor. I toddled over to some shelves, and I can remember looking down at my chubby knees and thinking, it's incredible that I can get around on these 2 legs and have my hands free to touch stuff. I was really young. I looked back at dad, who was talking to some guy in a green apron, and they both smiled at me, so reassured, I kept exploring. Then I saw my very first black person. She was probably about 40, with a dusty old dress and headscarf, really run-down shoes, and a sullen older child walking behind her. I was fascinated, so I toddled after her, got her attention, and lifted my arms up to be picked up. She looked around, so I did too. Dad was nodding his head at her, so she picked me up. She had the most beautiful colored skin, and it was so soft. I was stroking her face in awe of it when I noticed tears were trickling down her face. Somehow I knew she suffered because of her beautiful skin, and I laid my head on her chest and patted her shoulder with my hand. In my baby talk I told her that it would be okay, that when she returned to her real home, heaven, she would be joyful and at peace and all her suffering would be rewarded with angels' songs and love. I told her that when she got home, no one would care about the color of her skin. I saw all of this in my mind, and I was explaining this to her. And she just held me and let me coo at her. Eventually she let me down, and I toddled happily over to dad, who picked me up and took us back home. Years later I asked mom how old I was when I learned to walk, and she proudly stated that all her kids were walking by the age of 1 year old. Dad remembered this day, too. He was amazed that I remembered it. I did not begin any formal religious training until I was 5 years old, so I had no conception of religion. I certainly knew nothing about racial disparity. At that point we didn't even have a TV. This was in Western NY about 1958, there were more cows than people where I lived. It's not a creepy story, but I can't explain how I knew that day. I was just too young to know any of it. The Blue Man. We had recently moved into our house, and my brother and I were sharing a room and even had bunk beds. It was a basement room, and lacking carpet made it perfect for it's your guy's duty to deal with a puppy at night. One night shortly after heading to bed, the pup starts to whimper a little bit. Thinking nothing really of it, I roll over and put my hand down to pet him. He whimpers a bit more, and I assume it caught my brother's attention, causing him to look over too. Why the dog started whimpering became rather clear. There was a large blue person standing in our room. It was kind of see-through but lit. It gave the impression that it was taller and larger than it was. It shouldn't have been able to stand in our room, yet it clearly was. The proportions were off a bit too. The hands went down to his knees, and the shins seemed longer too. I remember watching it and getting the feeling it was looking at me. It turned around and walked away. It seemed to take forever and in slow motion. It walked through the open door, across the hall, and stopped for a second before it continued walking right out the basement wall. Once it was gone, I asked my brother if he saw something. He said that he had, and before he could start talking about it, I told him to go tell his story to our parents before I did. I wanted to know that I hadn't given him details or altered his view. Naturally our parents both thought we made it up before we talked to them. Still the fact remains that we both saw the same blue person thing walk out of our room and through a basement wall. Every once in a while my dad will teasingly bring it up. Either way, we both know what we saw. I was 12 to 14, not sure exactly how old. My best friend was spending the night at our house. We lived at the tail end of a road on the outskirts of a small town, about 4-5K people. It was night, probably around 9 to 10 p.m. We were just taking a walk, chatting stupid guy stuff. Well, we get on the road and start heading away from my house, and thus out of town, and we immediately see two small glowing red lights, close to each other. Now our road was probably some 500 feet level, then dropped about 50 feet over the next 500 feet or so, between two small farm plots, until it bottomed out and hit an old back road. The eyes seemed level to us, which made it seem like it was within that first 500 feet. We watched it. I loved stargazing as a kid and had never seen anything like that before, for probably 5 minutes or so before it seemed to turn away and disappear. I say turn because it seemed to fade instead of disappearing instantly as a light being turned off would. It seemed to move slightly, but I cannot swear to that. Well, my friend, being a bit braver than me, wanted to go see what it was, now that it was gone, that is. So we ran back inside and got flashlights and headed back out slowly. We went all the way to the end of the road, and everything was cool, but when we got there, we heard what sounded like something large moving down the old road to the right. So we go that way, me nervous as hell after the red eyes and the loud sound in the woods around us. We finally get to the end of that road, with light forest growth on both sides of us. We don't see or hear anything else, so we decide to head back, but we both kind of need to pee, so we walk off the road in case any cars come by. I walk off and am unzipping when I trip over something. I reach over and feel a warm, hairy body and scream my lungs out, bolting in terror. My friend rushes over and is half scared, half laughing as he shines the light on what I had tripped over. A dead deer. Nothing else strange happened on our way back, but red eyes and falling over a recently dead animal were enough for me. My father died when I was young. Several years after that, my mother married into another family, and I got some stepbrothers and sisters. Shortly after moving into the house my stepfather and his family had been living in for years, I was sleeping one night and had a dream. This was very shortly after we moved in, certainly within the first month, as I recall, but I don't know exactly when. So in my dream, I am in the bathroom. It was a correct rendition of the shared bathroom that all the kids who lived at home used. Some of my new stepbrothers and sisters were old enough to have moved out. In my dream, I get out of the shower, and I'm about to scrub my teeth, dry off my hair, and generally primp myself into the 13-year-old hormone-raging male pile of gorgeousness I was. But the mirror is fogged up, so I have to clean it off. When I clean it off, there is a ghostly image of a very stately older lady with what I call old lady blue hair. Just her head and shoulders. She wasn't in the mirror, but rather appeared to be standing behind me, which would have put her in the tub. I remember in my dream turning around and seeing nothing, but she was there in the mirror's reflection. She wasn't frightening or menacing, but in the dream I knew she was a ghost. And I wasn't scared, but the hair was standing up on my arms and on the back of my neck. What I call douche chills, not that I know if women even get chills when they douche, but whatever. So she was just there. Staring. Smiling gently. Head sort of tilting side to side. Nothing happened. End of dream. Fast forward to the next day when I got home from school. Shortly after we moved in, my mother had been cleaning up around the house a bit, my stepfather had been a widower for a bit, so things needed tidying up. Not maid-like cleaning, but things like going through the attic, garage storage, etc. So at any rate, when I got home from school, there on the table in the living room was a new picture that had been freshly framed. It was that ducking woman I just dreamt about the night before. What? The duck. I froze in my steps, and here came the douche chills again. Turns out, it was my stepfather's mother, who had been deceased for several years. My mother had found it in the attic during her cleaning up and decided to get it framed for my stepfather. The hair was identical. The eyes. The lines on the face. Everything. It was her in every way possible. No doubt. As an adult, I almost have myself convinced that I must have seen this picture before, perhaps it was on the kitchen counter or something after my mother found it, but before she took it in to have it cleaned up and framed. I don't believe I did, however. I still get chills thinking about it. The dream I had is as clear in my mind as it was over 30 years ago. One night when I was about 8 or 9, I was staying over at my grandma's house. It was the middle of the night when I woke up suddenly. I found it strange that I was fully awake and not the least bit groggy. My grandma and sister were in the same room with me, and they were staying on the bottom half of a bunk bed. I was in the top half. Anyways, I suddenly couldn't sleep, so I was just lying there looking around the room. I look at the door, which was slightly cracked, and see a face. My heart sank, and I suddenly felt dreadfully scared. The face looked like one of those guys with the makeup from the movie Dead Presidents. It felt like hours had passed with me looking at this thing. After a little while the person pushed the door open a little more, showing a white cloak thing. A small pale hand poked through and started to gesture with its finger for me to follow it as it walked backward and out of view. I didn't, of course. Instead, I reached down and tried to wake my grandma and sister, but they didn't. I eventually fell asleep and had an extremely vivid dream about a woman trying to grab me out of my bed. It was a pretty shitty night. My family ended up moving into the same house where we still live, and there's still some weird shit that goes on around here. For as long as I can remember, my brothers and I have been haunted by these things, which we call figures. They are basically dark silhouettes in the form of a person. We usually see them in the front room of our house. Interestingly, if our dog is not eating, sleeping, or outside, he can often be found in the front room, either sitting or lying down while gazing out the window. Our parents haven't really experienced anything paranormal, except for that one time the old piano, which we have in the front room, started playing by itself. When my Nana died back in 2013, I kept seeing, hearing, and even feeling them left, right, and center. One night, I was tossing and turning in bed, trying to get to sleep. I opened up my eyes to see a figure standing at the edge of my bed. Except, this one wasn't a dark silhouette, it was milky white. I stared at it for a moment, then closed my eyes in fear and didn't open them again that night. They even followed me to New Zealand. We were in a cave, going down a stream in a raft. As I was calmly sitting in the raft, I felt a hand run its fingers through my hair. I turned to my mom, who was right next to me, telling her to stop touching my hair. However, she said she wasn't touching my hair. It couldn't have been my dad or my brothers because they were on the other side of the raft. After a few months, these incidents stopped. As it turns out, when my Nana was only 5 years old, she saw a ghost with a fez sitting on the edge of her bed, very much like what happened to me. I was driving home late from my boyfriend's, which is about a 20-minute drive for me. The entire time I was driving I had a really bad feeling and a lot of anxiety. I had a voice in the back of my head telling me I needed to get home as fast as I could, but I couldn't explain why. When I finally got home I was already feeling relieved, but just as I was about to open my door I heard a voice yell, "Help me." I turned around because, for one, someone yelled "help me," and of course that's going to make me turn around, but also because I couldn't tell if I was just hearing things. The voice sounded off, almost not human, and whoever yelled it was speaking really monotone and nonchalant, which are not normal things if you actually needed help. I heard it again the exact same way, and suddenly a bunch of dogs started barking, which might not sound like a weird thing, but it was weird because they weren't barking one after another, they just all started barking at once. I heard "help me" the same way 2 more times before I just turned around and went inside my house. I could still hear it at the exact same volume even when I got inside, and it didn't matter where I was in the house, I could still hear it just as loud in the same way. I have no explanation for it, and I get chills every time I think about it. I was very young, hanging out with some older kids at my church at night because the adults were having evening service, or doing some conspiracy theory meetings, I don't know. We were a considerable distance from the church, yet we could still see it. Out of the corner of my eye I see one of the doors of the church open. It was the side door, the door that is the closest to the basement level where the youth and children have their sermons and Sunday school. And from that open door a dark figure steps out. The thing that haunts me to this day is that the light was shining down on the figure, but it was still somehow obscured. The other kids freaked out when they saw it, and we bolted away from the church. When we were sure it was gone, we came back and waited until the sermon was over. I later asked my dad if there was anyone who left church during the sermon, and he said no. And the thing is, that door is locked. It is always locked except for Sunday mornings. It can only be unlocked by key from the inside and out, and only the pastor has the keys. We knew it was locked because we checked it before we left the church. For a year I was a paranoid child wondering if the dark man would show up again. I can't say for sure what happened to me that night, but here is what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to arrive home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53 I am on a rural stretch of the 2-lane highway I take home, and I notice what appear to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, great, I'm getting pulled over, so I turned onto the next country road about a quarter mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared, and no car drove past. At this point, the story begins to take an unusual turn, leading you to believe that I'm fabricating it, as it resembles a scene from a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio randomly changed stations, the volume fluctuated, and both the dome light and headlights flickered on and off. This was at 10:56 p.m. I start thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of my car. So I lean down to pop the hood so I can take a look at the battery, and that is the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I know, I open my eyes and see nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. Where am I? Why the duck am I asleep in the middle of a field? Where the duck is my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about half a mile away. When I got to the nearest intersection, I looked at the signs, which read 350N and 50 watts. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking toward the headlights I could see on the main road. I can't say how long it took me to walk the half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out, my battery had died, which struck me as odd because I couldn't have been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car, completely dumbfounded, wondering what had just happened to me. After approximately 30 minutes of remaining stationary, I recalled that my battery was dead, prompting me to call AAA for assistance in jump-starting my vehicle. It took about an hour for them to get out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over half a mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I have only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I am sure people would either look at me like I'm crazy, or they would call bullshit on the whole story. And I cannot fault them. If someone were to present me with a narrative that closely resembles the typical encounter story, I would likely find it difficult to believe as well. Got a couple. First was experienced by my wife and 3 of our boys. We took a vacation to land between the lakes for the 4th of July. We had a cabin at a campground right on the lake. Boys were fishing from the shore, and my wife was out there with them. It's the 4th of July, so boats are all out, and music is playing around the area, and I came outside, and my wife asked me if I heard someone yell. I thought she had just heard the music playing, but I went to the shore and listened a little closer. We could all hear someone screaming for help. My immediate thought was that someone had fallen off a boat and was hanging onto a buoy in the water. We couldn't see anything, and we kept hearing every few minutes someone yelling, "Help me, please. Someone help." We called 911 and got a hold of management at the campground. Yelling kept happening every couple of minutes for the next 15 minutes or so. The sheriff finally came out after 45 minutes. Nothing had been called in, just nothing. We are almost certain at this point, we just heard the last cries of someone who drowned. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We kept checking the news around that area for the next few weeks. There were no reports of missing people or anyone drowning. I still check from time to time, and still nothing. We also didn't know the paranormal history of the area, so we're almost certain we heard ghostly screams. The second one happened in 2011, after I graduated. I moved into my old childhood single-wide trailer right beside my dad's house. We lived out in the woods in southern Indiana, so it was a super private area anyway. It's late at night, and my now ex is asleep on the couch by the hallways, and I'm sitting on the floor just kicking around on my laptop. I hear walking from the hallway and think it might be my dad. It wouldn't be the first time he came over for whatever reason a little late at night. I look over, and there's nothing there. Weird, but it's an old trailer, so I'm like, whatever. A couple minutes later I just hear "hey" right in my ear. My blood ran cold, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Eyes get teary just typing this out. I immediately get up and go to the other side of the living room and leave my ex asleep on the couch because duck that. Had some other weird things happen in that place and just that general area, but that was the creepiest of all the things that happened to me, at least. It was a sunny spring day. 3 friends and I were walking through a wildlife preserve in a marshy area alongside the Mississippi River near St. Paul, Minnesota. The trail was dry because it was built up a bit, but all the terrain nearby seemed to be in a natural state, a flood plain, I think. There were a few small trees but mostly tall grass. For some reason, we stopped walking and were standing still and talking. While we talked, or maybe while the others talked, I must have been a bit bored. I looked down and stared absent-mindedly at a couple of puddles at the edge of the trail. Water was trickling slowly across a patch of mud that separated one puddle from the other. The far side of each puddle disappeared into the grass. As I watched the trickling water, it slowly came to a stop. Then, after a pause, it started trickling the other way. I told my friends, "Hey, see that water that's trickling right there? A minute ago, it was going the other way." They all started watching. A minute or so later, maybe less, the flow gradually stopped, paused, and reversed again. We watched it go through a couple more cycles before we got bored and left. Not exciting, I suppose, but puzzling. When I was in college, I spent my summers as a camp counselor in the Poconos on the border of PA and NY. We'd spend off days drinking and being ridiculous at a place called Skinner's Falls on the Delaware River that was basically Type 1 rapids that you could rent a tube and go down or sit on the rocks to the side and get drunk. Mostly it was drunk people tubing, occasionally Boy Scout troop types canoeing, and a few times a day people in an actual raft. I was heavily drinking and ready to do dumb things and was talked into swimming down the falls with no life jacket. I'm a strong swimmer and was going to go down with a fellow counselor who just finished up his D1 swimming scholarship. We walked to the beginning of the falls and both started floating down. As we got closer and we realized how strong the current was, we both decided it wasn't a good idea and to swim ashore. I saw my buddy, who was a stronger swimmer, making it through the current, so I gave it my all, fully expecting to be able to as well. Unfortunately, I wasn't, and the attempt had exhausted me. I was sucked down the rapids, out of breath and entirely unprepared, only to find out later that there have been multiple deaths attributed to exactly what I had just done. As I'm about halfway down, I get pinned up against a rock and sucked under. I start getting spun around for what seems like forever, and I've already made multiple unsuccessful attempts at finding the surface. I remember thinking to myself, this is my last chance, and I shot my arm to what I thought was upwards, felt a rope, and grabbed on. I pulled myself up and saw that the rope I had grabbed onto was a group of women rafting, towing one inner tube about 10 feet behind them. In a river wide enough to split a state, at least a few city blocks at the point of the falls, one of the 3/4 whitewater rafts that come down a day, towing a tube, which I had never seen before or since and can't fathom why one person would want a tube, crossed over the top of me for a fraction of a second but long enough for me to blindly grab the rope and pull myself up and jump onto the trailing tube to the end of the falls. I have no idea how. Last fall I truck camped at my archery hunting spot one night after work so I could be out hunting at daylight. I had camped in this spot a few times before, and it always felt just a little weird, but I didn't think much about it. It's in the sagebrush juniper high desert in the middle of nowhere, an hour from a paved road and 5 miles up a rocky 2-track that is virtually untraveled by anyone but me during archery season. There's a natural spring, a good wide flat spot, and some old loose rock foundations up against a hillside nearby from early Chinese mining labor settlements. Instead of messing with a tent, I just set myself up a nest in the back seat of my truck, full-size 4-door, grab a beer, plug in my laptop, and start a movie to wind down, Super Troopers, not Texas Chainsaw Massacre or anything. About a half hour later. Thump. Someone jumped in the back of my truck. It wasn't that I heard something and started wondering about it or thought I saw something moving and got myself freaked out about it. I felt the truck move with the weight and heard the noise of someone climbing in. I didn't even question for a millisecond what had happened. I grab my .45, throw the door open, and shoot out from under the sleeping bag/blanket pile I had moments before been quietly chilling under. Nothing. The open door turns on a cargo light, which shines right into the bed of the truck, and there clearly isn't anything in it that isn't supposed to be. The moon is out, and in this country that means you can see remarkably well for quite a distance. Nothing but sagebrush. As I come to grips with the fact that there is no one else around, my brain starts throwing facts at me. The only road in here is clearly visible from where I am, and there is absolutely no way someone could get here without me knowing it unless they walked a couple miles in the dark just to scare the shit out of me. I slowly calm down, open a beer, open another beer, and convince myself it was somehow just the truck settling after the rough drive and the noise was in my head. It's way too early to try staying awake until daylight, and I'm not going home, so there's nothing to do but forget about it and get some sleep. Settle back in, have some chuckles from the movie, drift off. Knock. 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 Someone is knocking on the window by my head. I open my eyes, and it's brighter out than I expect. My first thought is I have overslept, it's morning, and someone is knocking on my truck window because? I am so sure someone is standing outside the door of the truck. I open it slowly so as not to smack them with it. It is bright out, but only because the moon is now shining directly on that side of the truck. It's not morning, and there isn't anyone there. Somehow, Until that moment I had forgotten about the shenanigans from earlier in the evening. When I suddenly remembered them, every fiber of calm in my body tried to evacuate directly out my tightly clenched rectum. I instantly threw everything I had taken out of the truck into the bed, jumped in, and drove out. Spent 3 hours driving around, drinking coffee, listening to the radio, and waiting for daylight. Obviously I never camp there again, and even when I go near that spot at high noon, I get creeped the duck out. One time, I was following my brother from our grandmother's house to his house. Simple road trip, right? He has GPS, I'll follow. It'll be cool. Little did we know TomTom decided we wanted to go through the creepiest small little towns. It gets to be about nighttime, and we start coming into this town, and we hadn't seen a car in about 30 minutes. I was getting sketched out. So we come into this town, and we don't really see anybody. We don't even see many lights on and stuff, except from the middle of town. Near the right smack middle of that town was a house with 2 police cars and an ambulance outside it. The vehicle's lights were on, no sirens though. I get more and more sketched the duck out. Hadn't seen a single person, mind you. No one inside, no one outside. Not even a driving car. Until the last street light in the town. And a man is crouched down in the street light. Shirtless. Crouched. Eating something. From his hand. I hoped it was a sandwich. My brother calls me as soon as we leave town and asks if I was as freaked out as he was. I was. He was. We all were. It was terrifying and zombie-esque. I was not ready for it. I cannot fathom what happened in that town to make it that creepy. It scares the balls out of me every time I think about it. Oh, and then my brother said TomTom wanted us to turn around. We missed the turn. Age 8, living in a house we moved into that wasn't familiar. It's late at night, my brother and I are watching late night TV, and our parents are asleep. I walk into the kitchen from the living room to see if there is a snack, and I see my reflection in the kitchen window. But it looks very weird. I freeze and just stare. I call to my brother and ask him to come look, without me looking away. He comes and looks at the window with me, and I just raise my arm and wave at my reflection. It waves back. I put my hand down, and my reflection still waves at me. Then it stopped and put its hand down. My brother tries it, it doesn't work for him. We turned on all the lights in the house and locked every door. The next morning, Mom asks us if we went outside, because the dog's chain was pulled through the kennel fence and hooked on his collar. We have no idea. Later in the same house, after coming back from a family trip, we had toys from the airport. They are little plastic planes that you hang from the ceiling by a string, turn on the motor, and they fly in circles at rapid speeds. Mom tells me not to leave it going and leave my room on the 2nd floor. I do anyway. She tells me to go upstairs and turn it off. I go back upstairs and see the plane is gone. I can't find it anywhere, at all. A month later, find it in a tree 3 miles away, 80 feet in the air, tied to a branch. Years later, after moving from that house, a teacher of mine moved in and told me a weird story that happened to him at the house over the weekend. His kids were coming down for Thanksgiving and were supposed to show up Wednesday night after driving 4 hours from the airport. Around 11 p.m., they awakened to the sound of laughter, giggling, and jumping on their backyard trampoline. The teacher thinks it's from his kids. Sees them the next morning at breakfast, mentions, "Heard you guys jumping on the trampoline last night. You had a lot of fun?" His kids look at him and tell him that they didn't get in until 3 a.m. because their plane got delayed, and they snuck in and went straight to bed. All I can say is, I truly believe that house is the nexus/portal/wormhole/whatever for weird shit to happen. A long time ago, my friends and I were hanging out at a park in the middle of the night. Drinking and smoking. Doing no good. We never bothered people because our community all knew each other one way or another. Then from across the park we saw someone running directly at us. We didn't think much about it since there were always people exercising at this park. Even at weird hours, I looked away for a minute or so and placed my beer down. One of my friends screamed, "Run!" All of us quickly dispersed, thinking that maybe it was a cop. Where we would hang out, there were bushes that went upwards to homes above the park. All of us scattered in different directions up the hill. I ended up with about 4 of my friends near the middle of the hill. Said hill wasn't that big. All of us were completely stunned to see someone dressed in all black, breathing heavily, and laughing like a madman. I just remember how dark he was dressed. The park had pretty good streetlights. But that man appeared to be a shadow compared to the rest of us. So here we are, 4 kids sitting in bushes at a local park, scared shitless. This man was maybe about 4 feet in front of me. He started to turn back around, and then my buddy's phone started to ring. The man stopped dead in his tracks and turned around again, digging through the bushes looking for us. I am sure he heard the vibration. He looked for about 30 seconds or so. Stopped and laughed. This laugh was something straight out of a horror movie. Then he just ran in the complete opposite direction. We all waited in complete fear for about 10 minutes. We all decided to run directly to my closest friend's house. At the same time, we were getting on the phone with our other friends to make sure they were safe. Nobody answered. They all made it to a shopping center that was close by. We are jogging to my friend's house. Out of nowhere, a 2006 or similar year Toyota Tundra comes flying out of nowhere and almost runs over my friend. As I pick him off the ground, running and lifting him to keep moving. The truck goes in reverse and back at us. The houses that were behind the bushes also had a condo complex, and the streets were super narrow. We hopped a fence in a backyard and waited there for about 20 minutes. We were all shitting our pants, none of us were talking or saying anything. We all have the common goal just to get the duck to a safe place. We hopped the fence again and ran about 3 miles back to the closest friend's house. To this day, I have no idea what happened. That is one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. My friends at that time were such a tight group. We know everyone and never found out what happened. I ran into my friend, the one whose house we were running to, about 2 years ago at a local store. I completely forgot about it until I saw him. I asked what he thought happened after all this. He is just as stumped as me and thinks about it all the time. I am uncertain, and to this day, I find it difficult to comprehend what transpired. My roommates went out of town to visit friends in another state, and I was home alone, smoking weed and playing COD. My dog was lying next to me on the bed, and he seemed very uncomfortable. A while later, around 1 o'clock, I get up to use the washroom. I go to open the door, twist the knob. But it's really hard to twist. I twist harder, and suddenly the knob goes from slightly turning to full-on resistance, as if someone on the other side is holding it and twisting in the opposite direction. I freak out and step back from the door in shock. I stood there for a minute in silence, just listening. Nothing. I creep to the door and hesitantly try again. The knob will not budge. I have been locked in my bedroom since my handle won't move. There is no lock on my door. After a few more minutes of abject terror, I resolve to get out of my room no matter what I have to do. I grab my hunting knife and try to pry the door open, hoping, it was just severe airlock from opening/closing my window. The moment I think the door is about to open, I hear a loud and static scream in a female voice. No. Stay. I screamed a little and actually jumped back. My dog starts barking and cowering. I cower as well. I stood there for about an hour with all of my electronics turned off to hear better, but I heard nothing. Eventually, I sit on my bed with my dog, and we both stay up all night, staring at the door. I'm still clutching my knife. The sun rises, and my mind can't take it anymore. I get up and open the door with no difficulty at all. It just opens. I search my empty apartment, still fearing someone is there, but all the locks and deadbolts are in place. It gets weirder. The next night I have a dream, which I can recall 100% perfectly. I plan to turn it into a short story, which terrifies me. In my dream, I wake up with the sun pouring into my room, and for some reason in my dream I don't have a dog. I get up like usual, make coffee, shower, etc. When I get out of the shower, I start to notice something is off. It's too quiet. I live in a very busy part of the city, and I don't hear any cars or people. I look out the window and see no signs of life. I get scared. Impulsively I walk to the front door and look out the peephole. There is a woman in a raggy white dress with wet black hair hanging over her hidden face. She is staring back at me through the peephole, seemingly waiting for me to leave the apartment. Or preventing me from leaving. In my dream, I am too afraid to leave the house and slowly run out of supplies while waiting for help. I constantly check the peephole, and she is always there, waiting. I grow skinny and pale, and I eventually starve to death, never daring to leave the apartment. During the summers of high school and college, I worked at a large Boy Scout camp in Southwest Virginia. The property is 17,000 acres of dense wilderness with 2 base camps and several backcountry outposts. Over the years, there have been plenty of strange occurrences. I'll do my best to recount a few of them. One year after the summer session had ended, a few of us stayed in camp to hang out and help with some final winterizing before heading back to school. One of our tasks was to clean up the empty staff cabins and shower house. To give you an idea of the layout of staff camp, it was basically a parking lot with 2 large cabins for the senior staff on the west side, a shower house, with pseudo-outdoor stalls like you'd find at a state park, on the south side, and several smaller cabins for the junior staff on the east side. Since all of us were in a senior cabin, We went through and swept out all the junior cabins, made sure the porch lights were off, and did the same with the shower stalls. That night, while chilling on our porch, we looked across the parking lot, and 3 porch lights were on in the junior staff cabins. Only the 4 of us had been at camp, and we had no reason to turn on the lights. The next night we noticed a light on in the shower house, which had been fully cleaned and each stall padlocked. We were using the nice bathroom/showers in the admin building at this point. Upon investigation, we discovered that the stall with the light on remained locked from the outside. We discovered feces in the toilet after unlocking the stall to switch off the light. Another summer, again after all the campers were gone, a similar small group of us was down on the lake in canoes fishing and screwing around. It was about dusk, and I noticed a light on the side of the hill behind the lake. It was like a normal incandescent bulb, but it was shining through the trees in an area far from any camp buildings. I told the others, and we stared at it until another one showed up. It didn't appear abruptly but seemed to slowly brighten out of nothing, like with a dimmer switch. After a few more minutes, another one appeared the same way. At this point, 2 of the guys paddled to shore and jumped in the truck to go check it out, though where the lights were coming from was pretty dense wood on a steep hill with no access by road or trail. As soon as we heard the truck get up to the top of the hill, the lights faded out. They walked down through where we had seen them but didn't find anything that could have been a light source. The first-year campers use one of the wilderness camps, about a 2-mile hike from base camp, once a week for their overnighter. This camp is at the edge of the property with a road running by it and a creek on the opposite side. A friend of mine who was the first-year program director for years has heard scouts playing in the creek across the road, but when he goes to yell at them to return to camp, no one is there. Another of our outposts is a frontier living program where the campers live like 1840s era pioneers. The staff even wear period attire. On occasion they have seen a man walking through the camp early in the morning dressed like a Union soldier from the Civil War. Even some adult leaders have reported seeing him, with no prior knowledge of his sightings. At the same frontier living outpost, the camp director's cabin is about 40 yards from one of the campsites. The rowdiness of teenage boys, known for their loudness and late hours, sometimes keeps the camp director awake. Almost 1 in the morning, they were getting out of hand. Out of exasperation, the camp director just yelled, "Shut up," he yelled into the darkness without even getting out of bed. The noise died away instantly. Puzzled, he wondered how they had heard him over their own noise when he was that far away inside his cabin with all the doors and windows closed. Then he realized that it was Saturday night between sessions and that there was no one in that campsite. I had a tough childhood and bad associations with my childhood home, so I don't ever know what to think about this. Poltergeist? Ghost? I slept with the lights on every single day. I do not remember a moment I did not feel uneasy in that house. The least of it was stuff turning up missing and reappearing. I would find stuffed animals that had been gone for months sitting on top of the clean laundry that I had washed myself. Right on top to find. I would half finish books, and then they'd up and disappear, and I'd wake up with them on the floor by the foot of my bed. Kitchen implements were a famous one around the house. The shears or the good knife would go missing and reappear in the knife block at will. Forks would turn up on random end tables. Once I was looking for my glasses, and when I turned around, they were on the floor behind me. Hated that. There was a patch of grass in the yard that was very much the classic 3-foot by 6-foot grave-looking area where no grass would ever grow no matter how well seeded. We lived on the site of an old railroad, and my father always said it must have been something industrial dumped or buried there, but the feeling of something watching you was intense. The area around it had been landscaped, so it was a perfect circle with the dead grass rectangle right in the middle. There was also always the sound of crunching gravel, like someone walking up the path. It happened so often I quit thinking about it, but now that I've moved out for years, it is very weird. You'd hear gravel crunching in a footstep-type cadence, and then the porch swing would creak like the wind was blowing it back and forth. It was metal and set on a metal stand, so it made a very distinctive rusty metal groaning kind of noise, sometimes for over an hour. Then it would just stop. There was never anyone out there, but the swing was always swaying even though it was under a covered porch near the house and protected from the wind. There was a mirror in my bedroom that my teenage boyfriend, now husband, hated. He made me cover it up with a blanket whenever he came over. It faced my bed, and I'd always slept so uneasily in that room. One night I was asleep, and I uncovered it. I saw the quickest flash of a woman in a wedding gown looking dress through the mirror. The angle I saw her, it made it so that she would have either been floating or hanging. I pissed my parents off by taking it off the wall. I was not messing with that ever again. When my now husband saw that the mirror was taken down, he exclaimed, "Did you see the lady?" Writing this now, I feel a little ill. One last story. Almost funny. It was just my now husband and I, teenagers, upstairs and doing things we shouldn't have been. We hear a feminine voice, I assume my mom, yell, not a deer. Rosie, our dog at the time, wants out. We dressed so fast, in the oh shit my mom is gonna kill you way of teenagers doing shit they ought not to be. I book it downstairs. My boyfriend stays upstairs, I assume trying to think of how to get out of this. Nobody home. No cars. Nothing turned on. Signs cowering under the table won't come out. I call my mom, and I can hear the sounds of her work going on in the background. Needless to say, we did not go outside. Which I guess leads me to one last story that I forgot until right now, that I just put together. Our house was surrounded by a little grove of pine trees on all sides. My mom was absolutely stringent about shutting the windows at night. No blinds open, floodlight if you're going to walk the dog. One day she jokingly, but not, said something about having seen something hopping through the trees once, and that was that. It scared her so badly that she never opened the blinds at night again. I don't know what the hell it was she saw. I never asked her to elaborate. I once had a dream. I was walking solo down a familiar dirt path towards a wooded area. Side note, the path felt familiar to me in the dream, though I had never been down this path before. As I walked toward the wooded area, the feeling of familiarity changed, and the path ended at an old abandoned cemetery under the tree canopy. The familiarity suggested the path continued, and the cemetery should not be there. I was drawn into the cemetery toward a specific grave. The detail was vivid. There was an old stone bench next to a sunken grave. The headstone had an angel on top. The remaining wing had a pine needle hanging from a cobweb, drifting in the breeze. It was peaceful and quiet. I immediately woke up and felt like the dream was calling me back. I felt oddly connected. The jolt from waking up was so startling I decided to write the dream down. Fast forward a couple of years. I was considering buying a house with my girlfriend. After we reached a house we were considering, the realtor called and said she was running late. While waiting, we walked the outside of the house. Behind the house, we noticed a path past the overgrown grass going into some woods. To kill time, we decided to walk the path to the trees. While walking along and enjoying the sun on my face, I was hit with an intense feeling of déjà vu. I knew this place. As we reached the woods, there it was, the abandoned cemetery. It was the same cemetery in my dream. I told my girlfriend I'd visited this place in a dream and described specific details down to the pine needle. She thought I was trying to pull a stupid prank until she saw the sunken grave, missing wing and stone bench, and even the pine needle hanging off the angel's wing. She immediately walked back toward our car. The entire experience was a copy/paste of my dream with the exception of my girlfriend being present. Later that day, we were back at my house. She asked me how I knew all that detail. I let her read the dream I wrote down. I described the path, trees, cemetery, and weather perfectly. She refused to ever talk about the experience again. That was around 20 years ago. The experience still haunts me to this day. I grew up in a house that was built over a century ago. I think it was 105 years old in 1985, so very, very old. It was beautiful, but I hated the vibes there. Felt nasty. Unclean. Between the ages of 3 and 8 years of age, I would see a fuzzy, misty apparition that would play peekaboo with me in the mornings as I lay in bed. At first it would be misty and become intermittently more solid, waxing and waning in its visibility like power surges. For a long time I would stare, especially on weekends when I slept in and had time to ponder, thinking I was half asleep, but I would count, spell words, do my ABCs, and later recite prime numbers, pinch myself, and move about to make sure I was awake, and I always was. I am pretty straightforward, always have been. I could not believe my eyes, but then I got used to it, and it would just keep playing peekaboo as I read my books and magazines, went and got some cereal, sometimes took a bath and came back and read, and later when I got a TV, watched cartoons. It was my morning ghost buddy. I did my thing, and it did its thing. It was a misty shape of a head and shoulder and featureless but semi-solid. I could see through it, but also it was like static and would sometimes be more obvious and then fade back to a less solid fog. Also like moving particles if you stared long enough, like static from a TV but more white. It did not feel scary, just odd. It was almost like I was witnessing something highly unusual, and it was bemusing. A phenomenon of sorts. Anyway, the freakiest part is that it was doing the little peek thing at the top corner of a 10-foot door frame. Sometimes a little more than the head and shoulders would move out, and it would be an amorphous blob, but it's like there was a barrier, and it could not move far beyond the doorframe. I don't even know if it was actually truly conscious enough to be playing with me or if it was sort of stuck there at the frame and doing its thing, but I sort of felt it had some intention, just a feeling I had. Eventually it would stop, or the light would get so bright it was not discernible, but I think it stopped about mid-morning. Never saw it at night or dusk or any time during the day if I took a nap. This was only in the morning hours between dawn and, say, 10 or 11 a.m. Eventually I just stopped seeing it. Could be because I started closing my bedroom door at night as I got older and wanted privacy. Looking at the history of the house that was built by a distant relative who owned a sawmill and local hotel, he was a bad actor. From what I understand, at some point there was a fire shortly after the house was first erected in the 1880s, and the stairwell and upper floor were damaged and reconstructed. Not a devastating fire that killed anyone, but the stairwell and foyer on the second floor by my bedroom were not the original but 20 years or so younger. Maybe he killed somebody there because he was a southern gangster of sorts and was involved in getting rid of some folks, or so it said. Some people did pass away at the house of old age and natural causes. Wakes were held there, so maybe a ghost? Appalachia is old with history predating the settlers, so who knows? So to my knowledge, no dramatic deaths, and my family are all about knowing the scoop on the family drama. Also, the house eventually burned down due to electrical issues during renovations after we sold it in the 90s. It had a majorly creepy vibe in some of the rooms also, like a feeling of dread and sadness. I had a playroom in the attic, and sometimes I would be playing and feel like I was being watched, and the hair on my arms would actually stand up like fear or static in the air, and my ears would start to ring. I describe it like the air changed. Like when you go to a higher altitude and your ears pop, or when the silence becomes audible, a shift in silence from normal silence to complete and thick silence. It was a total atmospheric shift, a pressure change. I would experience a profound sense of fear that could have led to a freeze response. However, I instinctively understood the importance of remaining composed, methodically putting my belongings away, and departing calmly without succumbing to panic or haste. As I got older, I heard some bad energies feed on fear, so it's interesting that as a kid I knew in my gut not to react. Remove myself, but not react. I have always had a good poker face, and maybe that's why. I also don't scare easily, even in situations that would warrant panic. I'll freak out later but in the moment stay cool. Like autopilot or going numb, which is good in times when you need your wits. That's the first time I remember engaging that mode, at about 5 or 6 years old in my attic playroom. Another story. We lived in a mountainous area, the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. At the base of the mountain there was a huge cotton field. It was beautiful, actually. But I would freak the hell out when I saw it. My mom said it started as a toddler. I would look at the field as we drove by, and I would start hyperventilating, whimpering, and getting tearful. Later, when I got older, around 5, and learned what was up, I would just hide under a blanket until we passed it to manage my exposure. As I got even older, I would just look at it and try to figure out what about it vexed me. It was a stunning visage. Beautiful and picturesque. Nothing happened there, like a battle or recent bad history. But my mind saw something my eye could not, and it was freaky, and I hated it. As an adult, I no longer get that feeling at all when I see the field. Just a peaceful place. People even take pics in the late summer and fall when the cotton blooms. Also, there are sunflower fields adjacent to it that are glorious. It's a sunny patch in the middle of mountains, a valley with meadows, and coming off the mountain, you get a bird's eye view, and it's like no other. But as a kid I wanted to walk a wide circle around it. I mean a wide circle. I was working on a job with a crew of about 50 that had to be housed at several locations over the course of 2 weeks. We were filming, and it made sense to house the crew in several different places during the period of the shoot, as our locations were all over the place. One night I finished at around 1 a.m., and there was a stuff up with the number of beds in a place or something. Honestly, I can't remember, but I ended up having to drive another hour to where we fortunately still had a house booked for that night. The 3 crew members who were originally there had since moved on to the next location. If you ever want to be a film travel coordinator, as you can tell, it can get pretty confusing. When I arrived at roughly 2 a.m. and walked into the apartment, I immediately sensed something was off. It just set off this vibe. I had to go round the whole house, it was fairly big, and check in all the rooms and wardrobes. I just could not shrug off this vibe I got. I can't explain it, but I couldn't ignore it. I set myself up in one of the rooms but couldn't sleep and ended up moving into the lounge room to sleep on the couch. I had to be up at 6 a.m. the next day, so I thought, even if I don't sleep, I can just rest for a few hours before I need to get up. I kept all the lights on, but I just couldn't shake the vibe. Eventually I got up to go to the toilet, and as I was walking across the lounge room, I felt something wet under my feet. I looked down, my socks are soaked, and I am standing in a wet patch of carpet. It was about 4 meters in diameter and was a completely perfect circle. I couldn't see anything leaking from the roof or anything. It was just a massive, perfect circle in the middle of a quiet lounge room that wasn't there when I walked to the couch about a half hour before. I picked up all my stuff and left. Sat in McDonald's till I had to start work the next day. I talked to the 3 crew members who stayed there for a few nights before, and they all spoke of the same sort of vibe I got. There were 3 of them in the house, and they all slept with their lights on, but none of them noticed any leaking or anything. We started looking the place up afterwards, and it turns out it was a converted old monastery that took in orphan boys. Couldn't find any info on any murders or anything, but we all had that distinct vibe that something was wrong. Can't explain it. Used to live in an old brick house for a fraternity back in my college days. At the time, I was the live-in president, and my room was adjacent to the porch where we always kept the lights on. One night, after staying up late into the morning with the boys, we were tossing around ghost stories, and the time-old classic of the house we were staying in came up. There were all sorts of myths about a skeleton being dug up back in the day, a woman in white, and even a boy appearing at night. I scoffed and laughed it off on my way to bed because I was a believer in the paranormal at the time but had experienced nothing of the sort. Big ducking mistake. A few hours later, early morning, I had a series of lucid dreams. Most I don't remember, save the last one. In it, I was hiding from something that I was afraid of in a grocery store, underneath a customer checking items out above me. I don't know what I was hiding from, but the milk they were checking out spilled and poured on my back, and I felt the intense rush of cold liquid in my dream, like it was real. Then I was awake. Upon waking, I heard a loud scream that sounded like a woman, coming from the porch. I thought, oh great, one of the guys did something stupid. So I awaited the knock at my door and even heard pounding footsteps into the kitchen next to the porch and down the tiled hall to my room. When the steps got to my door, no knock came, but I saw something moving in my room. I turned and was immediately frozen in place. Unable to talk, scream, move, or even breathe. What I saw was massive, a figure dark black, in the shape of a huge man, wearing a hat. He had no eyes or mouth, but I could make out the outlines of a face, and it looked like he was wearing a coat. He leaned in till he was about 3 inches from my face and just stared into my eyes. I felt like I was choking, and then after what felt like an eternity, he just vanished. I could move again after and felt like I had just run a marathon. Completely and utterly drained of any energy I had in my body. That was the first time in my life that I experienced genuine terror, and that feeling I would not wish on my worst enemy. For the entire remaining duration of my stay there, I would have frequent nightmares, hear knocking at my door or breathing, and hear someone turning out the lights in the house when I would be home alone. Other people began seeing it, especially women, and it would always be after a nightmare of someone ending everyone in the home. Once someone saw it during the daylight hours outside of its usual activities in the early twilight hours. I said, "Duck it," and moved back home to my parents. The moral of the story is do not ever challenge a spirit. Granted, I didn't know one was there, but if you think one is, just don't. The stories you hear about dark entities are very ducking real. That experience ducked me up, and still to this day I dread ever seeing a dark one again. The thing is, it wasn't just an energy imprint. It was purposefully ducking with me and other people, showing signs of intelligent life. And that is just odd. Back in the late 1990s I used to supervise a crew doing trauma scene work. We would go into buildings after homicide, suicide, unattended deaths, accidental deaths, fire deaths, or pretty much any messed up thing that could happen inside a building, home, or office. The following story happened on one of those scenes. I have a few others that have really stuck with me, but this one was probably more the work of evil spirits than others that were just sad. We often got dispatched out, sometimes with little details only, like vehicle damage to a structure with a fatality or fire damage to a structure with multiple fatalities. Sometimes it was very vague, like death inside a home. We were dispatched to a single-family house in the outskirts of Los Angeles, a working-class neighborhood with homes built probably in the early 1950s, not a bad rundown section but just an area where families lived, a quiet, unassuming area. We arrived at the site. It was a ranch-style home with a sweeping driveway to the street. The garage door was open, and an older lady was sitting inside the garage smoking. I walked up to her and introduced myself and said, "I am sorry for your loss. We are here to help clean up and do whatever we can to help you." I can tell she is nervous, but in most of these situations we run into people crying, shocked, or just stone quiet and unable to speak. Most of the time, they have someone there to help them, like a family friend, family member, or neighbor. However, she was all alone. She looked very uneasy, and I could see that she had a sofa, a TV on a stand, and clothes piled up in her garage. I asked her if she would like to show me the area where the incident occurred. She said to me, "I'm not going back in that house." She then points to a front bedroom window and says that is the room. I did not know what happened there. As usual, I wasn't given many details, not that I needed to know, but sometimes it helped knowing if we were dealing with a murder, suicide, or child death. I start to ask her if there was anything in that room that might be affected that she would like for us to save or secure for her. She said she didn't care about anything in that house, and she was not going back inside. I was just thinking to myself, this is sometimes pretty typical. No one likes to go back inside where loved ones were lost. She starts to tell me a story that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She said that her son ended himself in that room. She said that there were evil spirits in that house. I just said I am sorry, and she said, "No, you don't understand." She said that a year ago her other son ended himself inside the house too. The demons attacked him and took him too. She also said that a few years before that, her husband ended himself in the house too. To me, in all the people I have met in situations where loved ones were lost, you get a sense of grief and sometimes mental illness. I didn't get mental illness from her, what I got was a poor woman scared out of her mind. I asked her if she wanted me to call anyone for her. She said that either a family member or a friend was coming to take her away. I can't remember exactly what she said. I asked her to sign our paperwork allowing us to do what we needed to do and asked her if there was anything she wouldn't want us to dispose of. She said, "You can just burn this place down for all I care." I gathered my crew, and we suited up to go inside. We entered the room, and it was a smaller bedroom with blue painted walls and a little on the messy side. There was a pool of blood at the foot of the bed, vomit on the bed, and on one side of the bedroom walls, the entire wall was written in blood. We could only make out some words, as it almost didn't seem like it was in English. We later found out from a neighbor that the son, who was an adult, had drunk acid and then slit his throat and expired sitting on the bed. We cut out the carpet, wrapped the mattress up, and cleaned up the room so there were no longer any traces of what was left behind. During the time we worked, the old lady took off, and we locked up the house. The thing is, we were in the house for a few hours, and the feeling inside the house was like that of being in a cave or something. The air was thick, and the smell inside the house was sick, more than stale but pungent and foul. We all felt a strong desire to leave the house immediately. The way that the old lady was scared to go back inside and the fact that the house took her husband and 2 sons, I had not been a huge believer in evil lingering inside a place until then. I truly experienced that feeling, and I still remember it vividly today. I was biking through the woods on my longest planned trip yet, about 3 hours, when the trail split in two. I took the left path. It passed through a little area with some junk in it and a tiny abandoned-looking house, maybe historic? In the distance. The area looked like it had been inhabited, and I got kind of nervous about meeting hippie campers or something, so I turned around and took the right path. A short while later I came across this big clearing, a good 100 meters long as far as I could tell from satellite pictures. The trail crossed over a little road, and I was curious what was down the road, so I went down it. It was weird, it seemed to be an abandoned campsite with a bunch of little elevated huts in a long row. There was a massive pile of firewood as well as some scattered junk lying around. Near the end, one of the huts had a bird, I think a vulture, although that might just be overactive imagination or something, on it, which spooked me out well enough. I reached the end of the road, turned around, and continued on my way. The entire trail had a pretty creepy feeling around it for some reason. Cloudy day, not many other people on it. Near the end, there was scattered junk again, some tires and things 30 meters off the trail. And it didn't help that halfway through, in the middle of a pipeline clearing, my bike tire popped. That was annoying. Finally, on my way back, I passed the abandoned campsite thing again but decided to go down the other direction of the road. Phone maps showed that it connected back to a main highway, and I kind of wanted to get the hell out of this trail. Anyways, right near the end of the small road, it passed an abandoned house. Note, later on, after looking at satellite images/maps, I think this may have been the abandoned historic house I saw in paragraph 2, covered in graffiti, broken windows, spooky as duck. I noped out and rushed my bike over to the main road like the coward I am. No regrets. Nothing was really unexplainable at all, but it was certainly unsettling. I avoided that trail afterwards. I was out fishing in an area close to my family's farm in Estonia. It's basically a small pond with a 75-meter radius, connected to a local stream that carries some fish. We populated it with some fish years ago as well. I always considered it a safe place to be. Main road was 300 meters out, and the easiest way back was through a little thicket and then cutting across the crop field that my grandparents rented out to the local industrial farmer. I hated when we did that even though it was still technically our right to use that bit since that was not part of the agreed land, but anyway, I digress. So I'm out fishing, standing partly in the water. Suddenly I feel really uneasy. I've never felt quite this kind of dumb panic before. It's as if every iota of my body was begging me to book it, but I ignore it and continue fishing. Now if any of you have ever been in an actual forest before, the kind where you can't see anything but trees in your entire view, you notice that if you are quiet, you will always hear something, like the forest is alive. After fishing for a while, I secured 2 fish in the fishing box that I carry. All of a sudden everything goes quiet. The birds stop singing, and all the small insects that were on the pond are just gone. The wind stopped blowing through the trees, and the surface of the pond was like glass. It was as if the forest had just stopped around me. I crouched down low because you learn after a while that this usually means a bigger predator is close by to your position. We had wolves, bears, and boars. Duck these guys. I'd rather go against a bear naked than a boar. I listened intently for any sign of activity or movement. The seconds felt like hours to me. Nothing, the kind of nothing that just screams at you to get the duck away. I slowly decided to get up in a standing stance and scan my environment. At this point, I get out of the water, and it's almost as if my moment just doesn't disturb the water in any way. At this point, I decide to duck off and go make like the 5-pound fish man and just get rid of the fish. So I take off my boots and put on my hiking shoes. At this point, I hear a branch snap. Duck. I look at the general direction from whence the sound came. Nothing was ducking there. At this point, I'm ducking done. Take the turkey out before it turns into the Griswold family Christmas dinner. I am about to pick up my stuff when I hear what I can only describe as the wind whispering, "Go away." I wish I could say I remained steadfast and overcame my fears, but I can't. I ducking booked it towards home. It usually takes 10 minutes from the pond to home using the field. If my time would have been measured, Usain Bolt wouldn't have shit on me. I just ran right back and ran indoors. Later I and my grandfather, together with a gun, go back to the pond and take a look. No sign of any animal. But my things are gone, my rod, my boots, my bait box, and the fish just poof vanished into thin air. I don't think it was an animal, as they tend just to take the food and trash the rest. Later back home my grandfather, who is spiritual, tells me how the forests are old and have an energy we can perceive. He tells me that listening to the forest is important and to respect it. I don't necessarily believe that. While I acknowledge the existence of an enigmatic natural energy, I find that being in the forest typically brings a sense of relaxation rather than a panic attack. I still don't go over there without asking my grandfather to do his little ritual of asking the forest whether we can enter or not and try to avoid it altogether. 4 years ago, shortly after we bought our place, I was making dinner, and my dog was sitting by my feet hoping for me to drop something, as pets do, lol. I heard the sound of the basement door, and I looked up to see my husband coming up from downstairs. I told him dinner was almost ready, and he didn't really acknowledge me or anything. He just kept walking right into the living room. Our dog stood up immediately and followed him. The way the house is laid out, there's a short hallway that leads from the foyer to the kitchen and the living room, and in that short hallway is a door to the basement. The door to the basement is loud, it kind of sticks, so there's no opening or closing it quietly. You can see most of the living room from the kitchen, but when you sit on the couch, you're out of sight. Even though I couldn't see him, I just started chattering away at him, talking about some work drama or something while I kept cooking. All of a sudden, I hear the basement door sound again, and I stop talking immediately. And 1 second later, my husband stepped into the kitchen from the direction of the basement. I was facing that same direction the whole time, and to leave the living room, he would have had to come back through the kitchen, the way he came in. He was like, "Are you talking to the dog?" And I just stared at him for several seconds. Then I asked if he was in the basement the whole time or had come upstairs. He said no, he'd been playing video games for a few hours down there. I walked over and nervously peeked into the living room. The dog was on the couch, but nothing else was out of place. I told my husband the whole story, and it freaked him out too. But we both felt like it couldn't have been any kind of negative entity if the dog thought it was okay, so I always saw it as a time slip, maybe me and the dog seeing my husband come up at a different time than it actually was. Intriguing experience during a bivvy night alone in the mountain. This happened to me in June 2015 during a bivouac in the Massif de la Chartreuse Mountains close to Lyon, France. It does imply a UFO, an orb? Even if I want to stress that this could probably be a dream/hallucination during a state of sleep paralysis. Even though the latest discovery I made me reevaluate my opinion. Nevertheless, I want to talk about it because 1. I think a lot of abduction stories are related to sleep paralysis experiences, and 2. Whatever I say or think, I keep having this memory coming back again and again. To such an extent that I am now considering regressive hypnosis. I like the outdoors. In those days I didn't have a child and was single. I had plenty of time for myself and could enjoy these kinds of solitary moments. I had been starting to go on walks alone in the mountains, around 2,000 meters altitude, for 2 to 3 day periods. I traveled light, with a basic kit, water, food, and a very light one-person tent. I had been walking up this mountain for several hours and arrived on a plateau around 1,900 meters altitude. I was planning to walk a lot more, but having left my mountain shoes in the city and being so stubborn, I found myself waiting in the partially still snowy undergrowth with running shoes. Yep. Stubborn. I decided it was a bit stupid and resolved to settle camp very early, not far from the open part of the plateau, close to a few firs. Thought it would be a decent, wind-sheltered spot. It was only 5:30 p.m., but the ascension really had beaten me. I also had a pretty bad sleep the previous night, so I went straight to cooking and eating my dehydrated rations. I was a bit bummed about not being able to reach the destination and had nothing really to do as the weather was starting to be a bit chill and gray. I fell asleep very fast around 6:15 p.m., knowing I would probably wake up in the middle of the night. Being so tired, I had a really violent fall into sleep. Having those jolts and jerks and being semi-conscious, not really being able to wake up. I did wake up around 10 p.m. because of the cold. I really was ill-equipped facing 1 degree Celsius temperatures in a 10 degrees sleeping bag, with an extra down jacket but really not nice cold waves all night. Night is dark out there. Black in the woods. Utter. And the silence is deafening. I was finally starting to fall rapidly into deep sleep again when something made me open my eyes. I could barely half open them because I was feeling very drowsy but saw a blue light slowly drift next to my tent. I could see it pass through the canvas. Slowly. I was so dizzy but not scared. I was just thinking, oh, there's a blue orb passing by. But suddenly I felt like I was quickly pulled from the ground. Like if I were violently lifted. I was floating and could feel gravity still pulling on me, then nothing. I woke up abruptly in the early morning light, my face was facing down on the floor, and I woke up saying, what the EFF? You see, sleeping in a tent in these conditions is tricky. You have many layers of clothes and then your sleeping bag and not a lot of space to move. I use a narrow solo tent. I am used to sleeping on my back, especially when camping, and stay this way because changing position is a hassle. You have to move like a worm just to be on your side. Also, I must have put my hands in my jacket pockets because of the cold. They were now stuck in there under my belly. I had to move a lot to free them from there and be able to move all my upper part. What I am saying is that if I had turned over consciously, I would have known it, and it would have taken me a lot of effort and some energy. And how come my hands were still in my pockets? A whole fuss to take them out of there, and I'm not going to turn on my stomach with them in there. So yeah, I was really surprised to wake up like that, and I didn't like the feeling of how the hash did that happen. I made myself a tea, ate a cereal bar, and packed. I had a few hours of walking in front of me. When I got out of the tree area onto the plateau, I saw Anatherton about 30 or so meters away. A guy was sitting there looking at the sky. Our eyes crossed, and we looked at each other for a moment. I always regretted not asking him if anything weird had happened to him during the night. Funny thing to end this story, I have been thinking about this night quite a few times since. Years later I went on the UFO Stalker website on their report map. I wanted to have a look at reports in the area. Well, the closest geographical report, even though years apart, describes a turquoise blue orb in the mountains. To add a bit of folklore to this story, at the age of 18, 25 years ago, I had a CT scan done of my frontal sinus due to chronic infections. The doctor who made and analyzed the scan was a family friend. He called me and asked me to pass by his office. He started to ask me a lot of questions about my medical history, especially if I ever had any fillings in my upper teeth. Turned out I was lucky enough to have good dental hygiene and never had any cavities in my adult teeth. I told him no. He then proceeded to show me screen grabs of my scan on his computer. There was sitting inside my sinus cavity a perfect little white equilateral triangle. I asked him what it was and if it was a problem. He replied that if nothing changed, we would live it. He did look quite perplexed and slightly disturbed and did say it was quite weird and dismissed me. I made nothing of it at the time and proceeded with my life. I wish for my sake I had had the curiosity to ask for these scans, but as I said, it didn't cross my mind at the time. I still think these are all funny coincidences, TBH, it's just that I don't have anyone I can talk to about these things, and it's nice to find open-minded communities like this. Thank you for listening. When I was in high school, my mother was in a bad car accident. The lady who lived across the way from the accident got our house number from my mom's purse and called us. My sister and I drove over to the accident, and I had to jump a fence on the highway to get to my mom with a cop telling me I couldn't do that. As I saw my mom covered in blood and people working on her, the officer in charge asked where my dad was. I said he was at work. My mom told me, no, he's fishing, and he was. The thing is, her throat was crushed after hitting the steering wheel, one vocal cord was destroyed, and the other badly damaged. A few years later, I asked her about that, and she could only remember hearing my voice. She doesn't talk using her voice box anymore. Now she uses her diaphragm, so it comes out as a whisper. A few years ago I was on a road trip driving from Florida to Kentucky. We were driving straight through, so it was around 3 a.m., and we were getting close to Atlanta. There was a group of 4 box trucks and 1 van. You could tell that these 5 vehicles were traveling together. Driving them were these 5 skeezy-looking men. What caught our attention first was the fact that they were all driving pretty erratically, swerving and hard correcting themselves, constantly tapping their brakes, etc. What was weird was that the box trucks wouldn't let anyone on either side or directly in front of the van. This ended up making it pretty difficult to pass them, plus it's 3 a.m. and we're just trying to stay awake, so this was relatively entertaining. So we kept pace with them for a while. The weirdest part to me was their braking. It was like all 5 of them had Parkinson's and didn't realize their foot was hovering over the brake. It was a goddamn light show. They knew when cops were going to be on the side of the road and they would slow way down below the speed limit when passing them. Eventually, their crazy driving started getting a little too dangerous. We knew what was up. By this point, we had been driving near them for at least an hour or so, but the closer we got to Atlanta, the more cars were on the road, and they almost ran a few off the road. So, I called the cops. Since we were on the interstate, they had to keep switching us to the next county over every few minutes. While I was on the phone with them, though, one of the drivers saw me on the phone and looking in their direction. It was almost as if he knew what I was doing. I was legitimately scared at that moment. Duck. This crazy mother ducker is going to drive us off the road for breaking up their sketchy-ass box truck motorpool, and this is how I die. No cops ever came. We averted their crazy driving. We never saw what was in that van. And they all 5 got off at the same exit in the middle of nowhere. I definitely wish I would have followed them solely out of curiosity. It may not seem that sketchy to you, but it was ducking weird in real life. Just a little bit of background info that makes this story a little creepier. The busy road directly adjoins the high school I attended. The school has 2 entrances, but only the front has an underground crossing for the busy road. However, most students use the back entrance, which meant that many of them had to run across this busy road twice a day. Sadly, a girl got hit by a car, the speed limit is like 40 miles per hour there, and died, so the school built a bridge for safer access to that other entrance. On my first day attending this high school, my family moved house. We purchased the house at a low price, and for years I was unaware of the reason. It turns out that the girl who had died lived in this house. And my bedroom was actually hers, too. It always just seemed like huge coincidences, and I don't really believe in ghosts or anything, but every now and then, weird stuff would happen in that house. One example being when I was reading a book in bed one time. After I returned from the restroom, I noticed that the book was missing. While it may not seem particularly unusual, as it likely fell off the side, I searched extensively for it without success. I searched and couldn't find it, so getting frustrated, I decided to leave it and go to sleep. Now, this is one of my favorite books, Connor Golden, Wolves of the Plains for those interested, so of course I was going to keep looking for it. Again, I checked down the sides of my bed, by my computer, by my bookshelf, everywhere. Still no luck. Days go by, and I thoroughly check my room, especially down the sides and underneath my bed, no luck. One day, I get out of bed, and I see a flash of red out of the corner of my eye, no joke, the books were lying there, all battered and creased, in fairly plain sight where I had checked dozens of times. I was happy to have my book back, but there was absolutely no way in hell I could have missed it whilst I was looking previously, it was in such an obvious spot. Stuff like that happened all the time in that house. I and 2 other friends are sitting at a table in a pretty upscale lounge that is ceiling-to-roof windows looking out onto Monterey Bay. We are each midway through our first beer, engaging in light conversation. The conversation kind of dissipates for a minute or 2 as we take a few sips of beer and enjoy the beautiful view out the window. Suddenly all 3 of us notice something moving through the water across the bay. It appears to be just below the surface of the water. It is moving at an impossible speed. traveling approximately anywhere from a mile to 2 miles in the span of 5 seconds. It is traveling toward the beach. As this is happening, we all turn to each other and basically say, "Are you guys ducking seeing this?" All of us quickly answer along the lines of, "Yeah, I'm ducking seeing this." What the duck is this? As it heads toward the beach, in the last second or two before it reaches the beach, I start to think it's a torpedo about to hit shore. About 100 feet from shore, it changes direction about 90 degrees and shoots off, continuing at its impossible speed. About 2 seconds after it changes course, we all lose track of it. All three of us spent about 20 minutes afterwards trying to figure out what we just saw. What really baffled us was just the ungodly speed at which it was traveling. At least a mile, if not 2, in the span of 5 seconds, maybe less. A torpedo, in my opinion, is the only thing that could travel underwater at that speed. But these were populated waters with swimmers, surfers, snorkelers, and many boats. There is a Navy base nearby, but there is no reason for the Navy to conduct tests right next to innocent bystanders. To this day, the three of us have absolutely no reasonable explanation for what we saw. We partly attributed it to some alien phenomenon, as crazy as it may sound. Okay, so here goes. I go to college in northern Minnesota, Duluth. While there, I met one of my best friends, let's call him Jesse. Jesse's brother, Mitch, and roommate, Nick, live about 2 hours south of where we go to school, in Minneapolis. One weekend, Jesse and I decided to go visit the two of them, because they're both 21 and have some pull in the city, so they could get us into bars. We get down there on Friday afternoon, and they say instead of going out tonight, we're going to investigate some paranormal stuff at a house their buddy just bought. Apparently, they're huge into ghosts. So it's like 2 or 3 on Saturday morning, and we head over to this house. I, Jesse, Mitch, and Nick all head into this guy's basement, crawl space, rather. Mitch pulls out this Ouija board, and we all sit on the ground and place our hands on the piece. Nick asks, "Are there any spirits with us right now?" The board answers, "Yes." He asks, "How many?" It answers 1. I ask, "What's your name?" It answers, "Nala." We all are extremely creeped out at this point, so we decide to call it quits because it was working too well, and we had no idea what we were in for. We pack our things up and leave for Mitch and Nick's apartment. Alright, sorry, here we go. So we leave my friend's brother's friend's house and go back to my friend's brother's apartment, still following? At this point, it's about 4:30 in the morning, and Jesse's brother, Mitch, just making sure, has gone to bed. The only 3 people awake are me, Jesse, and Mitch's roommate Nick. We decide, bad idea, in hindsight, to get the Ouija board back out. We sit at their dining room table, place our hands on the piece, and Nick asks, "Are there any spirits here with us?" It answers, "Yes." I ask, "How many?" It says, 1. We ask its name, and it says nothing. So we start asking questions about us to see how legitimate all this is. Nick asks, "How many people using this Ouija board right now live in this apartment?" It answers 1, which is correct. I ask, "Where are I and Jesse from?" It answers, "Duluth." Now we're getting a little freaked out, so we make the questions tougher. Having never met Nick before, I and Jesse took our hands off the piece and had Nick ask it questions about the two of us, because there'd be no way to fake it. I go first, and I have Nick ask the names of my 2 best high school friends. This is where it gets weird, stay with me. The board answers, Mike Waycalls and Tyler Bolduin. Nick's never met them, I never told him anything, but the board got it completely right. Jesse's turn, same question. It answers Greg Flickinger and Dexter Mudgett. Totally correct. Nick gets up from the table, I and Jesse sit down, and we ask the same question for a 3rd time, about Nick's best friends. Walker, it answers, right, of course. So now we're getting very freaked out. We decide to make the questions a little tougher. We have Nick use the board by himself again, and he asks a complex question about our group of friends in college. In Cody and Jesse's group of friends, what's the name of the kid who thinks everyone likes him, but really, nobody can stand him? It answers, Tyler Hogue. Nailed it. There are no pauses between question and answer, no spelling errors, it's too goddamn real. So we take it to the toughest level we know how to by writing down something on a piece of paper in a different room and asking the board about that. Jesse goes first, I and Nick are at the table. I say, Jesse is in the bathroom writing down a number on a piece of paper. Go in, find out what it is, then come back and tell us. Something's different this time. There's no immediate answer, as if the spirit itself is going into the bathroom to find out. Another thing to add. Mitch and Nick have 2 of the most timid dogs I've ever met. When the spirit went into the bathroom, The dogs ran in there and started raising hell so loudly at Jesse. It was unbelievable. After a few more seconds, the board answers, 7. Jesse brings the paper out. 7. We're shaking now. It's my turn. I go in and write a letter down. They ask the question. Same thing, not immediately, the dogs start to attack me. The board answers. K. I bring my paper out. K, 2 for 2. This is getting too real. Nick goes in the bathroom, writing down a letter/number combo. Nick repeats the same action a third time. The board answers, R4. Nick reveals R4. Finally, we're getting too scared. We ask, who are you? The board answers, Nala. We realize it's the same spirit from before. Nick asks, did you follow us from my friend's house before? The board answers, goodbye. When I was 14, my dad and I were home alone as my mom and brothers went to visit the grandparents. One morning I woke up and got ready to go round to a friend's house. Dad said he wasn't feeling too great and that he was going to have a lie down. Didn't think anything of it and went to my friend's house. On the way there I had this feeling of dread and fear that I couldn't quite pin down, so I phoned my mom and told her that Dad and I were alright, but he felt ill. Nothing unusual at all. Dad was ill quite a lot with headaches and whatnot. When I actually got to my friend's house, I was there no longer than 5 minutes when the feeling of dread got overwhelming. I felt like the world was closing in on me and that I was about to die. Fear welled up in me, and it was impossible to ignore it. I left and walked home, not ran, I don't know why, the whole way back knowing, not thinking, I knew it as if it had already happened, that I was going to find something at home that I didn't want to. I've also just realized typing this that I didn't phone my dad as I walked home. I think I wanted to stave off what I was going to discover as long as possible. I got to the corner near my house and froze. A big hedge separates my house from the path, and I didn't want to go around because I knew what was on the other side. I could see it in my mind. A few minutes go past, and I eventually manage the few steps around the hedge, and my heart drops. An ambulance is sitting on my drive. The fear and dread disappeared instantly, and everything just seemed to become calm. I walked past the ambulance, still don't understand why I didn't look in it first, and into the house. The living room is a mess. My dad's computer chair is on its side, and everything on his desk is scattered onto the floor. I calmly walk through each room in the house, but no one's in any of them, so I back out to the ambulance. I knock on the doors, and the wait seems like an eternity. I didn't want them to open. Once they're opened, it's over. But they do, and there's my dad. Alive. Sitting up on the bed grinning with the paramedics. I can remember saying, that's my father, and then getting into the ambulance. I was angry, confused, and relieved all at the same time. For the last half hour my mind had convinced me that I was going to find something life-changing at home, but here he was perfectly, at the time, alright. When I'd left for my friend's house, my dad had gone onto his computer and suddenly thought that he was having a heart attack. He phoned 999 and tried to describe what was happening, but he passed out, and the next thing he remembers is the paramedics scooping him off the floor and taking him into the ambulance. Turns out his aorta was slowly but surely tearing away from his heart, and he was rushed into surgery. They chucked an artificial valve in him, and 10 years later he's fit as a fiddle. I'll never be able to explain what I felt and why I drew back home. I don't believe in anything supernatural or spiritual, so coincidence, I guess? A bloody weird coincidence. I have 2 stories that sort of roll into one. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I spent time in the woods behind my house, running around and pretending to be a ninja, an army guy, or someone with friends. Anyway, there is a rock cliff that is about 30 to 40 feet high. I start to climb it as I have before and get about a foot or 2 from the top. Then the rock I grab to pull myself up and hopefully to the top. The rock crumbles out, and I start to fall. It's like slow motion, feeling myself let go, and slowly the rock extends away. Just then a hand grabs my arm and harshly pulls me back up. Standing before me is a guy in his late 30s, he has blonde hair and a mustache. He stares at me for a second or two, not saying anything. I look down over the cliff, damn, that would have hurt, and look back up, and the dude is gone. The top is a clearing, so it's not like he hid behind a tree or anything. Anyway, I start to obsess over this. I tell my mom about it, and she thinks that how I describe the guy is weird. I ask why, and she tells me that when I was about 5 to 6, we went to the beach with my grandparents, aunt, and cousins. My cousins and I were in the water, and a bigger wave came and took me under. At that time, I couldn't swim at all. Even now, I can only doggy paddle enough to avoid drowning. My grandpa ran to me, but before he got there, I managed somehow to get up to the beach. My mom got there right after my grandfather and asked what happened. I told her the wave came and took me under, and the nice man pulled me out. She said she looked around, but no one was there, just her and my grandpa. She asked me to describe his appearance, and I told her he was older than she was. She was in her late 30s, with yellow hair and a mustache. I don't know what happened. Maybe my mother had told me the story before and I forgot. Maybe I managed to grab the top of the cliff as I was falling and for some reason thought back to the story that I had forgotten, but I can't explain it. I am not spiritual at all. I am not a militant atheist or anything. I leave it up for possibility, but I just can't explain what happened. This may not be relevant, but since I have no explanation for it, I thought I'd share. In November 2007, my senior year of HS, I was leaving my friend's house and driving home, about a 5-mile commute. It was about 1 a.m. I was driving home, sober, because my mom wanted me home, and since she never gave me a curfew, I figured I would respect her request. As I am about a mile away, a truck with its high beams on gets right on my ass. I'm doing 45, the speed limit. There's not much of a shoulder, but as I attempt to move over, he slams on the gas and passes me. Total badass. All of a sudden, he stomps on the brakes. I had little time to react. I could either slam into a guardrail on the right side or swerve across the oncoming lane and into the opposing shoulder. I chose the last option. Thankfully, there were no cars. Made it successfully over to the shoulder, still going about 30 miles per hour, when I notice a dried out creek ahead. I may be slowed to about 20, but I wound up colliding into the concrete wall that was at about a 75-degree angle in my little 1997 Saturn. Upon colliding, the airbags deployed, and I heard what sounded like a gunshot. I later learned that was the sound of my left femur breaking. On top of that, I looked down and saw my right foot facing left, ankle broken in 5 places, my left wrist broken, and my nose also broken. After a solid 15 minutes of yelling for help, I tried a few other, lame, tactics to get out of the car. Bad idea with broken limbs. My door was jammed and would not open. I reached everywhere my body would let me to try and find my phone. It was sitting in the cup holder before I crashed, so it could have gone anywhere. I reached around the back seat with my one good limb and found my camera and tried taking pictures of the street to get someone's attention with the flash. The car horn didn't work. Then I grabbed a fold-up chair that was also on the back seat and tried ramming the window. Why? I also tossed a few coins out to try and listen for water, to see if I was at risk of sinking. November in Texas equals no chance of water. Between all this I keep thinking my phone will turn up. No luck. Anyway. I did a repetition of those things as well as shouting, asking for help from God, and crying the manliest of tears. At around the 3 a.m. mark, I tried flashing my lights. When I realized that my lights never turned on, it occurred to me that my battery probably got ducked. I break off the rearview mirror to make one last attempt to search for my phone and decide that it's time to just sleep this out and solve this in the morning, later learning that with all the blood I had lost, sleeping would have been the worst thing to do at that time. I lean my chair back and laugh at the fact that while nothing has gone my way in the last 3 hours, my seat can still lean back. I make one final attempt to open the door, put my jacket over my eyes, and begin to fall asleep. Here's where it gets relevant. I had a dream. In my head, this dream lasted a good 10 minutes. I watched myself experience the entire accident. All the way up until I had fallen asleep. I saw a light bulb go off in my head, and I then picked my ass up, reached underneath, and pulled my phone out of my ass. Kidding. In the dream, I actually picked my ass up and pulled my phone out from underneath me. I immediately woke up and noticed only 1 minute had gone by. I proceeded to lift my ass, reach underneath, and recover my cell phone. I laughed at my inability to not check what was literally the closest spot to me and stared at my phone in shock. I opened it up, flip phone, like a boss, dialed 911, and put the phone to my ear. I then heard a very familiar beep, looked back at my phone, and saw, low battery, powering down. Before giving up hope, I remembered I had my phone charger in my console. I fished it out, and without thinking, plugged it into the outlet underneath my stereo. I plugged my phone in, powered it on, and called 911, and then called my dad to let him know. A few funny episodes happened during that time, but I'll spare them for the sake of getting the story over with. After that, I was airlifted to the hospital, where I recovered through the Thanksgiving break. I was homeschooled by one of my favorite teachers, wheeled around for a few months, crutched around school for the first week of February 2008, and was back on my feet shortly thereafter. So, all that being said, here are my 2 questions that I will never be able to explain. 1. How the heck did I have that exact dream, reenact everything, and find my phone in that dream in the span of 1 minute? 2. If my lights, horn, etc., did not work, how did my phone get enough power to make 2 5-minute phone calls? Sorry that was so long. It was the first time I have put that story into words. It was also quite satisfying. Walking up to something unexplainable. When I first got married to my late wife, I moved in with her. Every time I was lying or sitting on the couch, I would hear a clock ticking behind me. I never could find a clock. I asked about where the clock was, and there was no clock. It only happened when I was alone on the couch. I and my late wife were in bed one night, and I woke up to the bathroom light on and her standing by the bed looking down at her side of the bed. I could tell it was her, but there were no features that I could make out, just a soft, bright, almost transparent, white figure. She had on a nightgown that she did not ever sleep in. The light was brighter and had more of a soft glow than normal, and I could not see inside of the bathroom. I asked her if she was going to turn the light off and come back to bed, and then I tapped her side of the bed, saying, "Come back to bed, baby." She was already in bed. I felt her when I hit her side of our bed. Well, that freaked me out, and I just looked at her standing there, and the light slowly faded away. The light was kind of an angelic light, a bright, soft glow, but not hard to look at. Think thick, heavy mist with a bright light in it. I woke her up and told her about it. It freaked her out as much as it did me. It only happened once. We moved to the home I'm in now, and I never heard the clock or had anything like that happen ever again. Now I'm wondering if it was a premonition of her passing. She passed about 10 plus years after that. She died from cancer, ALK to be exact. Her type was discovered the year we met, in 2008. We didn't find out that she had it until 2020. She passed on May the 10th of 2024 in a gown in a hospital bed. For some reason that hit me tonight. I don't know if I'm reaching for things or what, but now that is stuck in my head, and I can't stop thinking about it. I was in my senior year of high school and fell asleep watching a movie at my girlfriend's house. When I woke up it was around 3 a.m., and realizing what time it was, I woke her up to let her know I was heading home. I'm driving home lost in thought, happily listening to music, on the same road I've driven 1,000 times before, when I suddenly feel this intense feeling of dread. No gradual shift or onset, just 0 to 100. 1 second I'm nodding along to the music with my windows down, not a care in the world, and the next I'm absolutely terrified. For no reason whatsoever. It felt like I was just slapped in the face with fear. It was so strong that I immediately hit the brakes and stopped my car in the middle of the deserted rural road. I turn my music down, roll my windows up, and lock my doors. Then I spend a good 30 seconds stopped in the middle of the road looking around trying to figure out WTF is going on. Why am I so scared all of a sudden? Maybe my subconscious saw something I missed and is trying to warn me? Maybe I'm half asleep and this is some sort of sleep paralysis? Maybe I'm losing my goddamn mind? After a while of not moving and seeing nothing, the fear begins to subside. But now I'm wide awake. Adrenaline pumping. I remember awkwardly laughing out loud to myself, "You are losing your mind. Ha 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 ha." And I start driving again. Instantly the feeling comes back. This time I pull my car to the side of the road and just sit there, engine running, looking through all the windows and mirrors, racking my brain trying to figure out WTF is going on. After a while, again the feeling leaves. I realize I feel completely normal. No fear, no dread. I even get out of my car and walk around the outside of it, check all the tires in the immediate vicinity, and find nothing strange at all. I remember yelling out into the darkness, "I know you're there." And waiting. Nothing. So I got back into my car. Before I drove off again, I sat there with my hands on the wheel, trying to simulate what driving home might feel like in my head. And I was able to make the feeling start to return. It's so hard to describe. It's raw fear, yes, but after sitting there and analyzing for a while, I began to realize it's more an overall feeling of dread or impending doom. Like the promise of bad things to come. Armed with this new knowledge, I found myself carefully adjusting anything and everything in my car that I possibly could for maximum safety. I put the rear seats that were folded down back up and locked into position. I stowed away a bunch of loose objects that were on the seats into my center console. I adjusted my seat height and the seat back to sit up more straight. I adjusted the height of the headrest and steering wheel. I adjusted all of my mirrors. Now one thing worth mentioning is that my car, 1995 Saturn SL2, had an automatic seatbelt that went across the shoulder when you closed the door, and because of that I would never bother to use the manual lap belt. Well, this time I did. I remember I had to actually get out of my car and dig it up from the side of my seat, where it was jammed from years of neglect. I carefully put both my regular automatic seatbelt and the manual lap belt on, and with the stereo off and my hands at 10 and 2. Started to slowly drive down the road again. Immediately the feeling came back. An incredibly terrifying and powerful sense of impending doom. But this time I power through. I know I only have about 10 more minutes of driving before I'm home and that I've prepared everything to be as safe as possible, and god damn it, I'm gonna make it home. But no matter how long I drive, I just can't shake the feeling. Instead of fading, it's actually getting worse. The longer I drive, the more scared I'm getting and the stronger the urge to stop the car is becoming. I keep driving, slower and slower, but I keep driving. By the time I finally turn onto my home street, that 10-minute drive has taken twice that, and I'm going less than half the normal speed limit. Hands literally shaking on the wheel, heart pounding from adrenaline, I see my driveway about a quarter mile in the distance. You know how, as a kid, you'd run through the dark to get to the light switch or your bed? Well, that's what happened to me as soon as I saw my driveway. An animalistic and uncontrollable fear took over, and just like when I was 6 years old running through the pitch-black basement to get to the light switch, I threw caution to the wind and stomped on the gas to get to my driveway as fast as possible. That's when the deer jumped out. I don't know what speed I was going when I hit it, but I remember seeing my windshield smash, and the next thing I know, I'm waking up upside down, held in place by my lap belt, in my car, which had rolled down a cliff. There's blood everywhere. But I'm not seriously injured. I climb up the cliff and limp home to wake up my parents and tell them the entire story, start to finish. They ended up telling me they've both had similar experiences with inexplicably bad feelings and to always listen to your gut. The car was totaled, but I was alive, and many who saw the aftermath said if I hadn't worn my lap belt, I probably would have died. Fast forward 5 years. I'm driving in a car with 4 other people, it's about midnight, and we're heading home from a party. Everybody is being loud and laughing, and the music is thumping, and we're all having a great time. Wham! That same dark feeling of fear hits me like a ton of bricks. I immediately pull the car over. Everybody asks me why we've stopped, and I start telling the whole story of the first time I had this same feeling, 5 years ago. By the time I've finished, it's been about 15 minutes, the feeling is gone, and my drunk/high passengers are thanking me for the ghost story. We keep driving, the feeling doesn't come back. All is good. About 5 minutes up the road, we see a horrific crash at an intersection involving 2 cars. We are the first ones on the scene, so call 911. 2 people are dead. We find out later the crash happened exactly when and where we would have been had I not pulled over. My buddy still likes to jokingly thank me for saving his life. I've only had the feeling twice in my life, both while driving, and both before potentially fatal accidents. It has been over 15 years since I last experienced that sensation, or anything even remotely akin to it. But if I ever do, you better believe I'm listening to it. When I was 14, my parents and I took a trip to Los Angeles and stayed in this hotel. We didn't book anything expensive because we were only passing through, so the hotel was kind of run down. Like the elevator sometimes wouldn't close. We stayed for a day, and it was good, but it was at exactly 3:10 in the morning when the thing happened. You know how sometimes you wake up and just instantly know the time, like you have an internal clock? I was right on when I actually checked the time. And I had this, uneasy gut-clenching feeling, kind of like I was paralyzed, but I knew I didn't have sleep paralysis or anything like it, so that was strange. We were on one of the higher floors, and there was a community bathroom in the hall. This laughing suddenly started coming from the ceiling, and I was freaking the duck out because my parents were still asleep. Like resonating through the ceiling and the walls, this really faint childish laughter. I honestly don't know what possessed me to do it, but I went to the window, and I opened it because I just had this sense that something wasn't right. I looked to my left, and I saw this woman open her window. I could only see that she was wearing this kind of nightgown and had brown hair that kind of shielded her face. It was really dark other than the city lights. And I kid you not, she turned and jumped out the ducking window. I swear to God, she jumped right in front of me, and I heard screaming on the way down. Immediately, I started screaming too, and my parents woke up, and I told them what had happened. So we immediately went to reception, and they called the police. Police got there, went to where I said she had jumped, and found nothing. Nobody, nothing. They went to the room a couple down from ours to the left, and it wasn't even occupied. Found out later after we got home that the hotel was the Hotel Cecil. Scariest situation I've ever been in. When I was a kid, I used to spend summer vacation in a village in the mountains, the Italian Alps. Now, most of the village was uninhabited, with houses left empty from people that emigrated to other parts of the world after World War I, World War II, and in the 60s, but the church was from before, from when the village was full, and so it was pretty large for a town that was deserted. It was still used, mind you, and I had been inside plenty of times. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a normal, old, large stone church. Adjacent to it was the priest's house, empty because the priest lived in another town over, near another one of his churches. I and a bunch of other kids used to play hide and seek during the night in an area that spanned practically the whole village, and one of the favorite places for me to hide was the terrace of the priest's house, which was high above the town and from which there was a great view of the roads below, so I could see the seeker from afar and move accordingly. One time I was hiding there, as I had been for at least an hour, chatting with a friend that was hiding with me while we waited for the seeker to move away from the base, when we saw lights moving from inside the church, as if someone was walking with a flashlight. And we also heard faint noises, like someone was speaking, but we couldn't make out the words because the church's wall was thick and the windows high. There was no way anyone could have snuck into the church without us noticing, since we had a perfect view of the door. It went on for a few minutes, then the lights and noises stopped, without anyone leaving. Needless to say, we were pretty scared. Years later, I was in the church chatting with relatives after the mass, and I saw the priest opening a small, concealed door on the side of the choir and putting a broom inside. I had no idea that door was there, so I asked him what it was, and he said that it's just a place they use as a closet. Then he added that it's a tunnel that goes on in the dark, probably excavated during the war as many others are in that mountain, and that they told him that supposedly you can reach the church in the other town over if you follow it, but he never tried. They would be a couple of kilometers underground, and he thought the tunnel collapsed somewhere anyway. To this day, I wonder if that tunnel never actually collapsed. My one-off experience. About 13 years ago I had a most unsettling and interesting experience. It is safe to say that it changed me and led to a type of awakening from the slumber of materialist skepticism. I am no longer a skeptic, but don't believe in ghosts as per popular culture. I also have absolutely no clue what happened when I stayed in that house. On the rare occasions I speak about it, I am struck by how mundane it must sound, but something happened, and I have no explanation for it. The words I have at my disposal are not up to the task. To set the scene. When I was a 23-year-old second-year uni student, no drink, no drugs, mature student, living in the Stoke area of the UK, I rented an old middle terrace house with my then girlfriend and some acquaintances. It was a poorly lit house, as it only had windows at the front and back on account of it being a terraced house. It had a dank and damp old basement with lots of old furniture stuffed inside and a loft conversion. This was my bedroom, which I shared with my then girlfriend, who took the smallest bedroom on the first floor and used it as a storeroom for all of her tat. A sweet black cat would show up at the back door every night meowing, which I befriended and fed tinned tuna on the regular, although I was scared of it at the beginning. Around back was a dark, potholed, and muddy cul-de-sac that served as a communal courtyard, car park, and public shortcut. It was not lit at night, and local hard drug users would gather there occasionally. All of this, I'm sure, paints the picture of a creepy old house, but it didn't bother me as much as you'd think. I grew up in an older house built in the early 1800s that made all sorts of noises, and the drug addicts were quite nice if you kept your distance and were polite to them. I say all of this to separate the general but tolerable creepiness one would expect living in a place like that from the pure existential terror I felt later on. As an aside, the house did, as I found out a year after we moved out, bother my housemate who had the downstairs bedroom. He and his girlfriend would regularly hear footsteps at night in the hallway and adjacent living room only to find nothing when he'd sneak out to look. I also discovered the following year that the students who rented the same house the year before we moved in all believed the house was not right and haunted and were glad to move out. Unfortunately, I am not in contact with my old housemates anymore, and never will be again due to fallouts in relation to my crazy ex and my own poor behavior when blinded by puppy love, and I only ever spoke to the other students once. They were the year above me on the same course, and cohorts rarely, if ever, mixed. If they did, I wasn't there because I preferred to be at home studying or reading. I also didn't ever ask the landlord because at the time he was suffering with late-stage prostate cancer, and I didn't want to cause any drama after I'd moved out, and I didn't want him to think I was strange. This is all just to say that I have no way to find any more information, and internet searches of the area's history have borne no fruit for this specific situation. So, the year went all right, the odd creepy noise was heard here and there, and the basement creeped me out, but that's because it was dark and had loads of old stuff down there. I've watched enough horror movies to know that basements are creepy. It's safe to say, I was scared of the dark basement because we are just meant to be scared of a dark basement, right? Just like the movies. To cut it short, nothing happened. Then the term ended. It was the summer holidays, and everybody excluding me moved out and went home for the summer. We were not renewing the tenancy. My term ended 4 weeks after all of the other tenants because I had to do clinical placement. This meant I lived in this large house alone for 4 weeks. I'm an introvert, and I love time alone. I'd had very little alone time that year. My hectic and intense course and my clingy girlfriend left me little to no time for myself. Naturally, I was very excited for a month of peace, quiet, and relative relaxation. It started great. For 2 weeks, I enjoyed it despite the minor background creepiness of being in a large, old house alone. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, and I felt like the king of the castle. However, after the 2-week mark I became aware of a creeping sense of dread that I couldn't shake, rationalize, or find cause for. I don't tend to be an overly anxious person, I enjoy my own company, and nothing overtly weird had happened to me personally whilst I had lived there. I began to feel very unwelcome and very much not alone. I felt how a prey animal surely feels when they feel the eyes of a predator on their back. It started small, like sensing my presence was unwanted, like sensing something watching me, the suspicion that something was going to be on the other side of the door, the fear of looking in the mirror and seeing someone behind me, or feeling like I was being followed up and down the stairs. I began to feel so scared that even in the day I would take the 3-mile walk onto campus and sit and work in the library if not on placement, and I would dread leaving placement, work, because I was afraid to go back to that house. I'd come home and be afraid. I became especially afraid of being in the dark. I devised a system for tactically moving around the house at night without ever being in an unlit area. I also did this during the day in the windowless areas. The light always had to be on, environment and energy bill be damned. The fear forced me from my large comfy room in the converted loft into the smallest bedroom, which had been my girlfriend's storeroom. I'd lock the bedroom door, even in the day, and sleep with my back to a wall. Always with the light on. I was inexplicably terrified. This carried on for 2 weeks. On the morning of the final day of the tenancy, I had to lock all windows, turn off all plugs, get some stuff from the basement, and lock the back door before I left through the front door, finally posting the keys back through the letterbox. I was utterly terrified and felt like I was moving in slow motion the entire time. The fear had multiplied overnight. I went around the house systematically, ensuring a light was always on. And that I wasn't in darkness. I had piled all my stuff, rucksack and duffel bag, the rest was mercifully packed in my car the day before, at the front door. This is where the fear became irrational, and I cannot explain what happened adequately. It was a warm, late midsummer morning, but the house felt dark, dingier than usual. I had finished my sweep of the house, and I steeled myself to turn the hallway light off. But the light switch was about 4 meters from the front door at the foot of the stairs. It was dark night upstairs, normal because there were no windows and all doors were shut. The fear built because I knew that when I turned this final light off, I would be in gloom until I got onto the porch, where I'd left the door open as wide as I could. I turned the light off and scurried away as fast as I could without turning my back to the stairs. Something deep inside me screamed at me not to turn my back. The daylight partially lit the hallway from the open front door, but as I got to the porch, the strangest thing happened. My neck hairs stood on end. And I felt an oppressive fear stronger than any fear I have ever felt before, worse than the fear I had a few years later when I suffered a fluke heart attack, which almost killed me. The fear was so strong that, to my shame, if I needed to pee at the time, I think I would have peed myself and not even realized. I could feel/see, sense would probably be a better word, a black and viscous shadowy mass slowly making its way down the stairs towards me. I felt such malevolence. I was in such a panic that I tripped backwards into the street and into sunlight and slammed the door. As soon as the keys were through the letterbox, everything felt fine. Like nothing had happened. I have never seen the house again, and I hope it stays that way. The only thing I can liken it to is the way a dementor or ringwraith attack makes one feel. Except there wasn't a caped humanoid figure. I couldn't specifically see it, but I could sense it with every fiber of my being. It sounds paradoxical, but I knew, something was there. The fear and dread was indescribable, and I have never since experienced anything like it. Any similar encounters? I was walking home from hanging out with my friends from a town over when I was like 14 or 15. My mom and grandma were at work but told me to tell them if I didn't get a ride, but I didn't want to bother them, and I had made the walk several times anyway. I got to an alleyway kind of thing on the side of a grocery store that I would take as a shortcut to get to my house. There were always homeless people there, but they never did anything. I was always fine. There was a drunk guy screaming there, but I ignored him, and I wasn't really fazed. But he ended up talking to me. He said hi, but I ignored him and kept walking. Then he said, "What's your name?" And I just stared at him because I got scared. I knew I shouldn't have stopped walking, but I did anyway. Then he asked how old I was, and I immediately told him my age because most of the time when stuff like that happened, they just left me alone because I was a child. But not this time. Then the MF asked where I lived. I was just frozen and said nothing. He took a few steps closer to me, then I was slowly walking away, and he just kept asking me my name, but I didn't tell him because I was scared. Then he babbled along about God. I ended up just getting scared and running away, and as I was running, he asked for my name, and I just screamed, "You don't need it," and ran the entire way home. He was screaming stuff about God at me as I was running. I heard it until I was too far to hear him anymore. It was a few blocks to my house, and I was so out of breath. I called my best friend the whole way home because she and her mom were on their way to pick me up. Long story short, her mom ended up calling the cops, and they found the guy in the same spot and talked to him. He said he never even saw anyone like me, and the scary part was that the cops told me that he probably wanted to do something to me because he wouldn't even admit to seeing me. That ducked me up for a long time because all I was trying to do was walk the duck home. Oh, and my parents blamed the whole thing on me, so it was the shittiest situation ever.